If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What is the most terrifying and creepy encounter you've experienced deep on trails, in the woods, forests, or outdoors with another human? Share the story you still can't forget to this day.
I go to a comedy/improv show every Thursday that ends around midnight with friends at a local coffee shop. It happens to be in an area with a little plaza with a few little shops. At the end of the plaza is essentially a split path. If you turn left, there are stairs that go down to the parking lot, and if you turn right, it takes you into a small forest path. My friend and I had left before the show ended since it was running over time, so most people were still inside. I decided, since it was nice and quiet and it was my friend's first time coming to the coffee house, to show her around the area. We walked up to the end of the plaza about 5 feet away from the split, and I was getting ready to turn down the stairs when I looked up and realized there was a man sitting cross-legged in front of the forest path. I have never felt such immense fear in my life. I jumped about half a foot in the air and went, "Oh my God," causing my friend to jump as well, but the man sitting there didn't even blink. He was so still it was like he wasn't breathing. In fact, he was so still I stared at him for a second before jumping because I thought he was a statue. What terrified me the most was his unwavering ear-to-ear grin and wide-open eyes. The rational side of me wants to say he was a drugged-out man who may have been homeless due to his dirty baggy clothes and unkempt hair, but here is where it gets very strange. I tried to dilute the situation and say, "Sorry, man, you scared the hell out of me," while walking quickly back the way we came, looking back every few steps to ensure he wasn't following us. But every time I looked back, he wasn't there anymore. When we were finally far away and found other people, I turned and told my friend about how strange his smile was, and she replied, "He wasn't smiling." This gave me goosebumps, as I distinctly could see the shine on his teeth where the street lamp was reflecting light. I have never felt such true terror in my life, and homeless people and druggies don't typically scare me. But it almost felt as if he was trying to tempt us or greet us to come closer to the woods. I truly feel like I escaped a terrible thing. Have any of you ever experienced something strange or unsettling in or near forests? Has anyone ever encountered something so strangely sinister and almost alluring in the woods? Something in the woods. This happened to me in high school. I was having a date night with my boyfriend at the time, whom we will call John, and we went to this really sketchy forest. Also, I want to note that the time was probably around 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. We went to this forest often around this time to fool around, obviously haha. But anyways, we always went to this specific spot in the forest that was way on top of a hill overlooking some of the city. As we walked up to the usual spot, everything was normal. We put our blanket down and went on our merry way chilling and talking and just in general enjoying our time together. We had been there for probably about an hour when my John looked at me and said that he felt strange. I asked him what he meant by that, and he just said that he thought we should leave. I kind of got freaked out, but I just shook it off and convinced him to stay. As time went on, John still had the same feeling, and honestly I was starting to feel a little strange as well, so we decided to leave. As we were picking up our blanket and phones, we looked to the left of us and saw a light in the distance. The hill we were on wrapped around a big chunk of the forest and was just covered in shrubs and trees, obviously since we were in a forest. But it looked like the light was heading our way. For some reason my logic at this time was really stupid. I specifically remember looking at John and saying, "It's probably some guy looking for his lost dog." Good God, was I dumb? He looked at me and said that we should head down the hill, out of the forest, and to the car. As we were heading down the hill, all of a sudden I felt the need to look behind me, and all I remember is seeing a blinding light in my face. At that moment, I realized it was the same light we had just seen in the distance. The light was so bright that I couldn't even see the face of the person behind the light. You can imagine that the next thing John and I did was run like hell. All I remember is as I was running, seeing the light moving quickly behind us and toward us. We ran all the way down the hill, through the forest, and to our car. We hopped in our car and sped off without stopping or breathing. As we were driving away, I looked back to see if I could catch a glimpse of the person who had been chasing us. And this is the scary part, there was no one. Literally nothing there. No light, no human being, just a path through a forest and an empty parking lot to the entrance of the forest. You may think he is hiding, but the forest path entrance was wide open. Essentially an open field with some small shrubs. No huge trees. So we would have seen the person. So to whatever it was we saw out there, let's not meet again. Near impasse on the mountain. I'm a real estate agent who works and lives in a small town in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I work alongside my husband at his family-owned agency that has been here since the 70s. We rarely sell homes or represent buyers for homes that are more than an hour outside our area. But occasionally, when I have an appointment with a client close to the highway that takes one up the mountain, I take the opportunity to drive another 30 minutes towards my favorite scenic mountain overlook. It was a rainy day in May that I needed to assess the progress of a house under construction. This house was only 30 minutes away from this overlook. I decided after assessing that the house had little to no progress since the last time I drove past it, I would head towards the overlook. There was nothing unusual about this rainy day until I turned left onto the highway leading me to the overlook. Several yards before coming to a stop sign, I noticed a black bird in the middle of the road that appeared indifferent to me driving straight for it. The bird's response time was delayed for a clean getaway. I heard its body flew right into the grill of my Ford and died, apparently. I'm not a crazily superstitious person, but I do believe in signs, whether positive or negative, that the world provides before events unfold. I told myself, this can't be good. After driving 10 or so minutes up the mountain, the light rain turned into a pour, making the road slick and the fog thick and extremely difficult to drive. At this point, I could feel something telling me to turn back. I felt that something was wrong and realized it was a feeling of guilt for having killed that innocent black bird. I kept driving. 5 minutes passed, and I wasn't far away from the overlook. For the last 25 minutes I had been driving, nobody was behind me until now. A small red Tacoma truck that had a Porta-John in its bed was tailing my car. I figured I would lose the truck since it would probably continue on the highway as I would turn left towards the overlook. To my unfortunate surprise, it followed me and proceeded to inch even closer to my vehicle. I was slightly panicking as the rain poured even harder and the fog made it that much more difficult to see the road in front of me. 2 minutes away from the overlook, I noticed a white truck with its lights turned on and pulled off to the side of the road. The car looked as though it was waiting for someone, but what a peculiar place to wait since there was nothing there. The red truck was still on my tail, and just as I was sure he would run me off the mountain, I found the overlook to my left, swerved into its parking lot, and let out a sigh of relief. It was short-lived. I looked to my left, and a few yards away, the small red Tacoma truck was parked as well at the overlook parking lot. For a few minutes, I sat in my car thinking maybe he's taking a lunch break, or perhaps he couldn't see anything past the fog and didn't want a chance driving in these conditions. A few more minutes passed, and the individual driving the red truck opened his door to get outside and, in his arms, held a gun. It was a 5'8" grimy man with black hair, around his mid-40s, with a toothpick in his mouth, overalls with a strap hanging off, and a shotgun that would make the bravest of men cower. He was making strides towards my car, but I didn't want to wait for him to reach his destination. I trembled with immense fear and immediately started my car and headed in the direction I came from. The grimy man did not follow me in his small red truck, but the white truck parked off the side of the road from earlier was on my tail and driving even more recklessly than the man with the shotgun. The rain was lightening up, but the fog lingered longer than I wished it did. He drove on my tail for 10 minutes until I finally lost him in the fog and quickly turned right onto a back road. I was relieved this did not turn into an impasse on the mountain. I think someone is watching me. So some backstory, I talk to myself a lot, whether it's to brainstorm or just when I'm bored, and I like to do this outside so I don't bother my family with it. The place I live in has bluffs all around and wooded areas galore, which doesn't help since I live outside of town, and right next to me and my friend's house is this little bit of woods with a dilapidated house. Out of nowhere, about 6 months ago, this camper showed up there, and my friend and I think maybe someone is living there and using the house for electricity or something. Regardless, about 3 weeks ago I was outside talking to myself at around 11 p.m., and I started hearing footsteps and felt as though I was being watched. I paused mid-sentence of my rant. Now I wasn't concerned about an animal because when I go outside, I bring a katana I bought on Amazon with me. However, as soon as I stopped talking, the footsteps also ceased, prompting me to shout, if any animal or person is up there, I'd suggest leaving since I have a sword and know how to use it. Obviously that doesn't sound that threatening, but I didn't hear anything else, so I shrugged it off and continued talking, but I heard footsteps leaving after I continued, and these were human for sure. It was only 2 feet walking, and it had weight behind the steps. Needless to say, I went back in the house after that. Now I wish that was it, but it got way creepier. Just a few days ago, my dad and sister left at around 6 p.m. to go to my brother's, so I was home alone. I was walking around talking to myself about OW2 for some reason, and when I passed my sister's room, I noticed the door a bit cracked open, which isn't out of the usual because she does that a lot when she leaves, but when I was in the kitchen, I heard her door slide shut, and I know it was hers because it sounds different than mine and my dad's. I figured it was no big deal, my sister just stayed home. Then I heard someone clear their throat, and it did kind of sound like my sister, so I shrugged it off and went outside to grab the mail. When I came back, it would have been like 10 minutes because I noticed a storm in the distance and was watching it. I figured I'd go in and let my sister know about the storm, so I said, "Hey, Erica, are you awake?" and slid open her door a crack, but when I did, she wasn't in her room. This had me on edge because that meant someone else shut her up and cleared their throat. I immediately got on a Discord call with 3 of my friends and told them what was going on. I proceeded to clear the house, katana in hand, all closets, rooms, and under the beds. Nothing. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to deal with it, so I sat down to play a game with my friends. While playing, I talked to the girl I like and told her that I was actually concerned, but she said that I was just being paranoid and needed to relax. I figured maybe she's right. But it's been a few days, and I know what I saw and heard. What do you guys think? Am I overreacting, or do you guys think maybe I'm right about this? I was traveling home to California, and I was in Nevada. It was an emergency, so I'd packed and left at around midnight. It was about 5:30 am or so in rural Nevada. I was at a stop on my usual route. I knew the stop well, it was about an hour from the California border. As a lone female, I carried a concealed weapon. I have my extended permit, which allows concealed carry in several states, except California, and while I was at my truck in an empty spot, I was in the cab disassembling and putting away my gun to ensure compliance. As I stepped out to use the restroom, I discovered that someone had managed to get close to my truck and was hiding along the passenger side, a fact I didn't realize until I had walked past. Whoever it was grabbed me from behind. I let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream. Oscar-winning scream. But there were no other people at this stop. I fought and tried to buck the guy off of me, but I wasn't doing very well. Kicking led him to lift me off the ground where I couldn't get him, and trying to break through his arms made him bend me over with him still behind me. I'm not sure how long I was screaming and fighting, but then I heard tires screech, and I figured it was the creepy van my parents told me to avoid as a kid coming to take me away. Nope. It was a Toyota Corolla full of local teenagers headed to the gas station before school. The teens jumped out and ran towards us, and the driver stayed in the vehicle. The guy who grabbed me took off, 2 of the kids chased him through the desert beyond the gas station on foot, and the driver and the other kid made sure I was alright. I send these 4 boys Christmas and birthday cards every year. Without them, I'm certain I would have been kidnapped or ended. Josh, Austin, Mason, and James, thank you guys. Followed in the woods. I was once with my friend taking pictures in the woods right before sunset. We got some great pictures and decided to watch the sky change for a while. We got to talking, and suddenly it was dark, and we figured it was best to head back. As we were walking, I noticed that it sounded like there were footsteps behind us, but my hearing isn't all that great, and my friend wasn't saying anything, so I brushed it off. After a while I took out my knife, it's only for when I'm in the woods, and told my friend what I was hearing. We stopped walking, and the footsteps stopped. My friend wanted to go, but I told her to wait and listen. We didn't hear anything, and we were about to leave when we heard a twig snap, and we booked it. We ran down the path and down this dirt hill that was at a super steep angle. My friend got down okay, but I fell and dropped my knife. I was going to grab it, but we heard some crashing, and so we kept going. When we got to the bridge, I stopped because there was a street light and people in the parking lot. We heard nothing. I even went back for my knife and heard nothing again. It totally could have been some kid messing with us, but it was pretty scary. Some other weird things like that have happened in those woods, but this was by far the creepiest. That one time at the camp. Last August I was attending this youth exchange thing, which was basically me and other 18-year-olds from all over Europe spending 2 weeks in Austria, camping in nature. It was a really great thing to attend, no stress, just fun and partying. On the second day, we all became comfortable with each other and formed quick friendships. And every evening, as soon as the sun set, we'd take out the booze and go drinking. Since a few of us were going to bed early, around 10 p.m., we decided not to disturb them, and thus we went away from the camping grounds to drink and have fun. We'd take this path north from our place and cross a bridge, which led us to this large field with a few haystacks and a forest on the other side. It was very dark, so a few of us brought their flashlights. Everyone was in an amazing mood, yelling and singing. No one thought about how we seemed like a cliché horror movie scene, you know, a group of careless teenagers partying in a remote place. After spending about 10 minutes setting up the blankets and deciding who's going to drink vodka and who is going to stick to beer, we decided to make a group photo and share it on our social page. We wanted to do one in the middle of the clearing. You know, the classical let's all jump in the air and smile like we're in that tampon commercial kind of photo. Denise was supposed to take the photo. She took the flashlight and tried to illuminate the place where we were supposed to stand. I didn't pay much attention, but I noticed how the majority of us suddenly got quiet. "Who the hell is that?" I heard one of my friends whisper, and, being the coward I am, I already began to tug a few of my friends and tell them to go back to the camp. I didn't even know what they were talking about, but I felt these goosebumps all over my skin. "Hey!" one of my friends called, and that's when I looked to the clearing and saw this guy standing in the middle of it. He wasn't moving at all, he was just standing there. I remember he had greasy black hair, his back was turned towards us, and he was about 40 meters away from us. God, even now when I think of it, I get this uneasy feeling. At first we thought someone was playing a prank on us, but it seemed far too illogical. A few of my friends began to yell again, telling the person to duck off and creep someone else out. However, the guy continued to stand there. My friends still kept yelling and making fun of the situation, but I just tried to pull at least one of them and run back to the camp. I was too scared to go on my own. We kept standing there for a minute or so, waiting for the guy to react in any way. But all he did was form his hands into fists and then relax them a few times like that. We picked up our things and left. I remember that night I couldn't fall asleep. I was just waiting for that guy to show up at the entrance of our tent. Since then, I didn't leave the campground at all, and neither did anyone else for that matter. Peeking through the trees. When I, 28 female, moved up near the Arctic Circle with my husband, 28 male, I was only 26 and halfway through my first pregnancy. It was just starting to turn from autumn to winter. We were waiting for our house to be move-in ready and had settled into a little hotel with a separate cluster of rooms right next to a forest. I frequently took walks with my dog Storm, usually until I reached a narrow clearing where I walked a bit more before turning around. I was still getting used to how far I could go while pregnant. We had never seen any people, or, most importantly, other dogs, while on our walks. So, Stormy and I could both relax while he jumped about in the leaves. One day though, my husband happened to have work off and wanted to see where we went. He took his new gun with him. When we got to the narrow clearing, we continued on toward where I usually would turn around, but before we got there, Storm suddenly jumped in front of me and began to loudly snarl. If it were an animal, he would have happily jumped toward it to herd. If it were a dog, he would have stayed clear, and he loves humans, so I was confused. As I stared off where he was looking, I finally saw the heads peeking at us from behind the trees a couple of paces from where I usually would turn around. I lurched forward and wrapped my arms around Stormy's neck, and by the time I turned around to look at my husband, he already had his gun drawn. With my boys standing their ground, both parties waited to see what the other would do. A few horrifying seconds passed, and I made the first move, insisting we turn back. They were hesitant, but the last thing I wanted was gunshots flying so close to our unborn daughter. They didn't follow us, and we made it back with everyone on edge. We soon moved to a room that opened up closer to our house, and we never saw them again, not that I could have made out any facial features anyways. Later on, I learned that there were a lot of weird cults in that area. Creepy white van near the woods at 3 a.m. My friend and I have this tradition of doing a very long walk, like 40 to 60 kilometers, once or twice a year. We plan the path we're going to take a day before, and we prepare everything we might need for the trip. One year, though, when we both were in high school, we had a really dumb idea. A few, actually. The first of them is that we decided to start this trip at 10 p.m., which meant walking all night. We live in Warsaw, the capital of Poland, which is a pretty safe city generally. There are some places known for street robberies, but we knew that we needed to avoid them, and we took a knife and a bottle of pepper spray. The second bad decision was to go through the forest on the outskirts of Warsaw. It was only like 4 to 5 kilometers inside the woods, so we didn't think about that too much. And the final bad decision was to get high as hell. We smoked a ton of weed before and during the trip. By the time we arrived at the forest around 3 to 4 a.m., we had smoked all the weed and were stoned hard. When we got really close to the entrance, I noticed a creepy white van turning onto the street we were on. It was moving weirdly slowly, and there weren't really many buildings on this street. Something felt very off. We went a bit further inside the forest, and at the same time, it stopped. Just as it did, a few, like 3 to 5, men jumped out of it and started going in our direction. At least I thought so. I panicked a bit, grabbed my friend who wasn't as creeped out as I was, and went into a random path in the woods that was perpendicular to the main one. It was bumpy and messy and just turned into a regular forest, but it didn't stop us. We haven't heard anyone behind us. We went out of the forest and continued our trip. Nothing unusual occurred, we enjoyed ourselves immensely, and my friend teased me slightly, believing I had overreacted. I haven't thought about this incident very much in the coming weeks. And then one day, about a month later, I read an article on the website of a major Polish newspaper that made my blood run cold. It was about someone the police found in the same part of the same forest I and my friend were in. They found it a few days after our trip too. Even now, the memory of that encounter still makes me shiver. Do you think these guys could really be dangerous? Was I over-exaggerating, or did we miss by a hair getting into something terrible? When I was a kid, I would explore the woods at my grandparents' house a lot. They lived out in the middle of nowhere, and I could leave at 8 a.m. and not be back by the next morning if I wanted to. Sometimes a few days. I would go there for a few weeks at a time and would do this regularly. I always packed enough food, my .22 rifle, and a rough map of the area and compass because it was extremely easy to get lost. There were barely any landmarks besides one stream, an old burned-down barn, and an old cemetery. I would say 500 to 600 acres of nothing but forest. I was far into the woods on my second day and smelled a campfire, so 12-year-old me started to walk towards the smell. I came upon a rough camp around noon made out of tarps and blankets with the fire barely smoldering. I looked around, and there were a bunch of food wrappers and cans everywhere. I thought someone else must have been doing the same thing as me. I started hearing leaves ruffling, so I slowly crept back into the woods and saw two grown men walking towards the camp with some grocery bags. I immediately was scared just by the looks of these two. Both scraggly, tweaker types. I hid in the woods, probably 50 or 60 feet away from them, for a few hours and could almost make out what they were saying. They kept talking about money and arguing over whose fault something was and how long they'd be there. It freaked me out. I slowly crept further away until I was out of sight and earshot. It was probably about 5 p.m. at this point, so I got a good distance away from them and got back to my grandparents' house just before dark. I never told them about this because I was scared they wouldn't let me go into the woods anymore. Wild man in the Wind Rivers. When I was around 13 or so, around 2001, my dad took me and 3 of my friends on a backpacking trip through the Wind River mountain range in Y. It's a beautiful and wild place if you've never been. So we had packed around 15 miles into this area called Rainbow Lake, got our camp set up, and then it got dark. It was increasingly smoky throughout the day and felt like a big fire was happening around us nearby. We decided to climb up this huge ridge, and several miles away we could actually see flames. We weren't close enough yet to panic, but we already knew we'd have to pack out the next day because it was a big fire. So the next day it is like the movie Apocalypse Now, and there are massive helicopters and planes flying all over to extinguish the fire that's getting closer to us every hour. Really smoky, and my friends and I are loving the madness. My dad seems super annoyed he packed all the way into this spot with 4 teenagers just to turn around. As a parent now, I'd be grumpy too. So we are hauling the 15 miles or so out of there as quickly as we can. Out of nowhere, remember smoke, this ducking wildman comes out of some random set of trees, like in a movie with a smoke machine, running towards us and shouting. He looked like he was in his mid-40s, had dark hair, was super disheveled, had a beard, and had a pack with minimal gear. Dude looks like Charles Manson or something. My dad gets in front of us to see what the hell this rabid, homeless-looking man wants. He tells us he's been up in the winds all summer. My dad is looking at his gear and immediately questioned how this guy was sustaining himself. The dude tells us he's been eating crickets and berries. He looked skinny and kind of gaunt. He starts hiking with us because everybody needs to get out due to the fire. Some funny stuff that happened, he saw my friend eating some crackers, looking like Gollum as if they were the ring. My friend offers some to him. This guy grabs the whole bag. We keep hiking, and he looks back 10 to 15 seconds later. This guy inhaled them, and they were gone. He also asked for water, and my dad was not having that. He gave him an old pump and told him to get his water. Guy runs off, and we are kind of hoping he just gets lost again or we can beat him out of there. Nope. He's some kind of gazelle and somehow finds water and pumps, and now he is back with the gang. Really not sure how he was able to do that. I can hear my dad say great when he comes running down the trail asking us to wait up. The longer we were hiking, the weirder this guy seemed to me. I have spent a lot of time in wild places, but this guy was just weird, and we never got any clear answers on why he was there or where he was from, anything like that. He never tried to harm any of us or threaten anybody, but it was just super weird. He had a strange look in his eyes. My 13-year-old self just pictured this guy picking off hikers and eating them while howling at the moon. Also, I've had some other weird and strange experiences in the winds, so it was just the whole package, I guess. We got to my dad's truck, and my dad was so sick of this guy. He asked for a ride, and although my dad obliged, he said, "You're sitting in the back." You just have to know my dad, he is a great guy but no nonsense and kind of the grump we all love. So Charles Manson is in the back of the truck, bouncing all over this place on this bumpy road. After the tense hike out and feeling so weird about this guy, we all just bust out laughing. I'm laughing while writing this out. He tried to yell something to my dad, and he just ignored him. Anyways, we dropped him off in the nearest town, and that was that. I have brought this up with my dad several times, and now we always laugh about it rather than feeling creeped out. I hope you got your creep on with a few good laughs like I did. Small town creep. I grew up in a town in the southwest. It was like a mix of mountain, desert, forest, and grassland. Sounds odd, but anyone who knows the southwest knows this is true. I was 17 or 18 back then, and I was hanging out with some friends around a bonfire. It was getting late, and my friends started leaving one by one. Around like 2 or 3 a.m., it was just me, a friend, and his girlfriend. We were way past our curfew. It was a very small town, so we just walked places instead of driving. We were going to walk my friend's girlfriend back to her house, which was on the outskirts of town. Now there's a highway that goes through town. It's a pretty long US highway with plenty of traffic during the day, especially since Phoenix is just like 5 hours away from said town, but at night, not anywhere near as busy. We were walking along the highway through downtown when a guy that was hiding behind a building began following us and was about 20 feet behind us. At first we thought he was a tweaker, but he walked like a sober man. We didn't have much to defend ourselves, except 2 small, dull pocket knives that couldn't even cut through wool. We kept walking down the dark town, praying in our minds. After a few minutes, he put his arm on my friend's girlfriend's shoulder. He said, "What's a lady like you doing out on the streets at this hour? I can give you all a ride home." We ran off towards the wilderness, hoping to lose him in the trees. We still heard feet trampling the brush, so we ran back to town. We were running out of breath, and he was still after us. Then a man in a car stopped and asked, "I'm headed to Albuquerque, and my GPS has no signal. Can you tell me how to get there?" As soon as the man pulled over, the creep ran away. Once the dude had left, the man said, "I saw you kids running and scared, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." We told him what had happened, and he called the cops. He stayed with us until the sheriff's department arrived. Since we weren't able to call anyone due to being chased, we immediately called our parents, and they came down. After we told our stories to our parents and the cops, I noticed the man was gone. I wonder what would have happened if that man hadn't been driving down the road, or if it had been someone else who didn't care. What did the man want? If you're listening to this, Mr. Albuquerque-bound guardian angel, thank you. Creep in the woods. This happened several years ago. I had a horse, and the riding ring was down the hill from the barn and was bordered by woods. It was the middle of summer, so most of the wood line was pretty thick. I was riding alone in the ring, but there were other people at the barn. My ride was going well, but then my horse started being spooky towards a spot in the woods. This wasn't uncommon for him. My horse was pretty spooky by nature and would randomly decide things he should be fine with were scary and try to eat him. I forced him to do circles near the scary spot and didn't think much of it. Eventually we took a walk break. As we were walking, we heard something crack in the woods. My horse bolted sideways. I circled him and turned him toward the spot in the woods. As we were looking at the woods, I saw a person crouched down through the branches. I thought it was the barn owner's husband doing some work in the woods. I said hi to him, but he didn't respond. The husband has some medical issues, so I thought he may need help. I took my horse out of the ring and down to the trail opening. Once I got into the woods, I went around to where I saw the person. My horse was being nervous, but I wrote it off as him just being a goof. I got closer to the spot where the person was, and I realized that it wasn't the barn owner's husband. It was a random guy. He had a camera and a backpack with him. I shouted in surprise, and he grabbed his pack and ran into the woods towards the back of the farm. I went out of the woods and back to the barn. When I got to the barn, the owner and her husband were mucking stalls. I told them what happened. They went out into the woods to look around. When they came back, they said they found a spot deeper in the woods that looked like someone was camping at, but no one was there. They set up cameras in the woods, but nothing more ever came from it. Man in the woods. I grew up in a town called Luther, Michigan, in the middle of the Manistee Forest. I'm talking small, like a population of 300 people. I lived with my grandpa at the time, and we lived in a small one-bedroom cabin he built deep in the woods. And to even get to it, you need to drive down a like 2-mile 2-track. So needless to say, unless you know who my grandpa is or your family, no random person is going to accidentally walk into our front yard out there. So now that I painted the picture, let me tell you the story. I must have been about 7 to 8 years old or so. As I said, it was a small one-bedroom cabin. So my bedroom was actually the living room. And we had this giant window looking out to the front area of the house. During the day you could see the driveway, the shed, my grandpa's project cars and trucks, and various farm stuff we had. But at night, pitch black. It was like someone put a black blanket over the entire house. My bed was positioned right up against this window, so I'd be sleeping next to it. As I said, it's small, so space was a premium. So I'd just curl up with my back against the window and fall asleep. I was a pretty heavy sleeper as a kid, so I'd be out the whole night. One night after I said my prayers and got ready for bed, my grandpa tucked me into bed and sat by the fire to read his Bible. Most nights he'd read his Bible until I fell asleep, then go back in his room and go to sleep himself. And this night was no different. He got in his chair, took out his Bible, and started to read, so I slowly fell asleep. I must have been asleep for maybe 3 or 4 hours when I woke up. My grandpa fell asleep in the chair, and my back was hurting, so I turned around on my other side. So now my face was staring out the window. And I was about to just close my eyes and go back to bed when I swear I saw a silhouette of what looked like a man standing right outside the window. Keep in mind that it was already pitch black outside, which meant he would have to be standing just inches from the glass. At first I thought I was seeing things, so I blinked a few times, and it was still there. I remember feeling super scared. And I don't move. Maybe I thought if I didn't move, whoever it was would think I was asleep and just leave. But the shadow didn't leave. And once my eyes adjusted, I could in fact make out a man with stubble standing practically right against the glass. Again, I didn't move. The man then knelt down where his face was at level with mine and looked right at me. I ducking started crying so bad, I was shaking, and that woke up my grandpa. When my grandpa got out of his chair, the man took off into the woods. My grandpa came over and started to rub my back, and he asked what was wrong, and I told him what I saw. Having experienced a difficult childhood, I knew that lying to anyone would result in consequences. So he knew I wouldn't make this up. My grandpa turned on the house lights, went into his room, came out with a shotgun, and went outside. He was out there for probably 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. And he came back in, and his face was spooked. My grandpa was a Green Beret in Vietnam. He doesn't scare like at all. But he looked freaked out. He came over to me and said he'll stay up with me tonight and even let me watch TV all night. Which he never let me do. And the whole night he sat facing the door of the cabin with that shotgun. The morning came, and the first thing he did was put curtains over all the windows. Then we went outside, and sure enough, there were footprints in the dirt leading out into the deep woods. After that I wasn't allowed to play in the woods alone anymore, and my grandpa moved my bed away from the window. Now about a week or so later, my grandpa was watching the news after dinner, and there was a story about a recently escaped prisoner that was found near Becky Trail outside Luther. The 2 tracks that lead to my cabin are both part of Becky Trail. He was hiding out in a hunting shack about a mile away from where we were. Even now, the thought of being alone in the woods at night still terrifies me. My wife and I were backpacking in a semi-remote area with our dog. We made camp and swam in a nearby river for a while before making dinner. As we're eating, our dog starts barking, and I look up to see a guy walking down the hillside toward our camp. As he comes closer, I see that he's visibly tweaking. He's not wearing a shirt, and around his neck he's wearing a double coil of thick chain attached with a combination master lock. At his waist he has a Japanese-style katana, but the hilt/handle has been replaced with a large elk antler. I walk over to see what he wants, and my usually friendly dog is going crazy barking and growling at him. He won't make eye contact with me and keeps stealing glances at my wife. We're in the middle of nowhere, and he tells me he's looking for a place to set up camp and he has some friends coming up. He mentions something about a goat, but he's mumbling, so I don't really catch it. I say, okay, and he starts looking around where we're camped and says, "This looks like a pretty sweet spot." He turns around and starts walking around the area. He then pulls out the katana and starts hacking branches off trees. This isn't some prop katana. It's hacking off 3 branches in one fell swoop. My hair is standing on end, and my gut tells me not to stick around to see how this movie ends. He tells us he's going to mark the main trail so his buddies know where to come down and find him. As soon as he leaves, we immediately pack up our stuff and hike out 8 miles in the dark. On the way out we have our headlamps on, walking down a single-track trail. We come around a corner, and a guy in a white tank top sees us, turns around, and bolts down the trail back the way he came from, in the direction we're walking. I'm extra weirded out now. We round a curve, and he's standing there breathing heavily. My headlamp catches his face, and he's smiling. I pause and tell him we're just hiking out. He smiles again, looks at our dog, and says, "Nice puppy." We sidle past him and pass a large cooler that he was obviously dragging up the trail. No idea what was in it, but it definitely had been used to store meat at some point, as the outside was covered in old dry blood. No idea what would have happened, but I imagine them camped next to us in the middle of nowhere, asking us to party with them. My dad always told me to trust my gut, and I'm glad I did. Followed in the woods. Hello all, I hope you are doing well today. Last night was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Here's the story. I left around 8 p.m. to go to a smoke shop. The sun set much faster than I expected. This particular shop is near a bike trail that I like to take home. So I got my stuff from the shop and began my walk home. I get onto the bike trail, and it's more or less pitch black, besides the street/shop lights bleeding in from the street. About 10 minutes down the trail, these two men, almost completely in the dark, look at me. I look back at them. One man says, "Hey, brother." I then respond with, "Hey, man." The same man then says, "I have a question for you," and begins to walk towards me assertively. I walk away, not running as to not raise suspicion. I hear careful footsteps behind. I continue my walking pace but pick it up a bit. Once I'm pretty sure I've made some distance, I look over my shoulder. I see two flashlights dash into the brush, seemingly trying not to be seen. I take the first path that leads into a neighborhood. I manage to get away, but there was a chemical smell in the air, on the path, that one of my Discord friends suggested was crack, due to the rubber-like odor. In closing, don't go into dimly lit areas at night. A 6 feet 8 inches tall man in a black drape blocked the route and waited for me, forest. This happened a few days ago in my local public forest/park in the south of the UK. It's a well-used area with dog walkers, runners, and cyclists, even into the evening. I walk my dog there regularly and know the routes well. It was around 5 p.m., just after dusk. There was still a bit of ambient light left, but the forest itself was dark. I was making my way home and had just crossed a pedestrian bridge over the M23 to get onto the side I needed. From the bridge, there's a one-way path that curves left and slopes downward, with tall bushes on both sides. The path dips slightly about 50 meters in and then rises again. Because of the curve and the bushes, visibility ahead is poor, especially in low light. As I started down the slope, my dog suddenly froze about 15 feet ahead of me. She wears a small red collar light, and when she stopped, that light briefly illuminated a very tall, skinny figure around 6.7 feet/6.8 feet standing in the lowest point of the dip, directly in the middle of the path. I hadn't shown my torch at them yet, but there was enough light spill from the bridge and my movement for them to know I was approaching. They were already positioned there, facing uphill toward me, effectively blocking the route. In front of them was an old, discolored suitcase, torn at the edges, with the handle propped upright. At that point I realized I couldn't easily turn back. The bridge behind me was exposed and would have meant retreating deeper back into the forest. I didn't want to initiate a chase. I made the decision to keep walking at a normal pace, pretending I hadn't noticed them, because I knew if I stopped I'd likely freeze. As I got closer, the figure appeared to grow in size due to the slope and lack of visual reference points. They were very tall, wearing a long, dark, pointed, hooded, draped garment that went down to their feet and was shaped like an upside-down rhombus/triangle. I still hadn't shown my torch directly at them because I wanted to avoid escalating or provoking anything. I had a 1000 lumen walking torch, a clipped dog lead with a heavy metal buckle clasp, and a metal flask on me. My brain was exploding with alarm bells ringing. I was mentally weighing up options second by second. My plan was to use the torch only if I needed a brief opening to get past. When I was close enough that I had no other option, I snapped the torch directly into their face to disorient them and immediately moved past. At that moment they reacted angrily and said, in a deep, low voice, "That's not a good idea." Their face was distorted, gaunt, and shallow, covered in black stains, with rotten teeth and yellow around the pupils. I didn't stop. I sprinted uphill past them into another wooded area off the path that was all uphill, glancing back with the torch to see them trudging through the woods in the darkness after me. I called my dog back, turned off both her collar light and my torch, and broke line of sight as quickly as I could. I kept moving until I was sure there was enough distance, then stayed low and quiet for a short time before continuing toward civilization. I could hear movement noises, heavy breathing, and sticks snapping briefly after, but I wasn't followed out of the woods. I got home safely, but the encounter really shook me, mainly because this is a public park, and the person had clearly heard or seen me coming and chosen to wait in a narrow, dark section of the path. I'm not sure if they're living in the forest or if they just like to scare late walkers. I don't know what their intentions were, and I'm not trying to run what if sequences in my head because I'm already struggling to make closure of it. I'm not claiming anything supernatural here. Just sharing a genuinely unsettling encounter and a reminder to trust your instincts and prioritize getting out over trying to understand someone's intentions in the moment. Creepy encounter in the woods. This is a story I didn't share with too many, because I guess it isn't as creepy as it gets, but I'll never forget it. My best friend lived near a forest, or more like woods with a little river, and we as kids loved to go there after playing video games. One time we went there because we were bored. It was a sunny day, but I don't remember the month. I was around 11 to 12. We were in the forest and throwing rocks at that tiny river and just walking and talking. As we were just walking, I felt observed like never before. I asked my friend if he felt observed as well, and he told me that he did in fact. We looked around until we saw a stranger on the top of a hill, looking down at us, all dressed in white, and a menacing bald guy. We were petrified. We started to run out of the forest. We were so scared. I never ran so fast in my life. I was shitting my pants, and it felt so weird. He had no reason to be there, just looking at us. He could have said something, but he didn't say a word, and we just stared at him for, 10 seconds, scared as we were. I had no idea who that guy was or what he wanted, but I've never gone back to the woods ever again, and what is most weird in this story is after that, I felt observed for a very long time at random moments, like in my bed. I don't know if this happened to some of you, to feel observed after a traumatic event, but if so, let me know. On my way home through the forest. This happened a year ago. It was the finals week at my university, and I studied every day in the library until late at night, 2 to 3 a.m. My university in Turkey is basically located inside a forest. The trees are especially dense on the road from the main campus to the dorms. Our campus is very safe, and I've never had any problems returning to the dorms very late at night. The biggest danger is the wild, aggressive dogs, and not your ordinary street dogs. Those are Turkish Kangals, one of the largest dog breeds in the world, that start their turf wars at night. So one day, at 3 a.m., I'm returning back to my dorm through the same road I take every single day, a long alley, surrounded by dark, dense forestry, but pretty well lit. I see a tall, dark figure of a guy 30 meters ahead of me on the same road. It was unusual to see someone at 3 a.m. on that road, but it didn't faze me much. We're moving with the same speed, so the distance between us remains constant. I get busy with something on my phone, and I don't look at the road at all, going by autopilot. 20 seconds later I raise my eyes from the screen, and I see that the distance between me and the guy shortened, and he is moving in the opposite direction. This was enough to startle me and cause a powerful surge of adrenaline. Why would anyone turn around so far into this road, at this time? Nevertheless, I tried to keep myself calm and look unfazed, although I could feel my heart racing as he came closer. Panic started engulfing me, and even though I looked directly at the person on a brightly lit street, I couldn't discern any facial or bodily features. To me, it just seemed a black figure. He finally passes me, and my heart is in my throat already. I carefully listened to his steps, which sounded more and more distant and calmed me more and more. He wasn't following me. In about 5 seconds, I worked up the courage to look back and saw that he was still moving in the opposite direction, and the distance between us was long enough for me to run away, if anything. I calmed down and decided to distract myself with my phone again, maybe listen to some music, speed up a bit, and reach home as soon as possible. A minute or so passed. I hadn't looked up from my phone screen. There was still a pretty long distance, but now through a narrow, dark road left until my dorm. I haven't heard anything to alert me so far, except for occasional howling from a long distance. I decide to look back to verify that I'm completely alone and can safely reach home. I barely turned my head and saw the same dark figure of the guy moving in my direction, much faster now, passing me by. I have never felt such intense panic and anxiety. My eyes were wide open, my ears were ringing, it felt like I couldn't breathe, and my heart stopped beating, but I still continued walking, now following the guy's trail. The stupor left me in 5 seconds, and I decided, duck it. I slowed down considerably, allowed for the guy to completely leave my perspective, and ran with what felt like an inhumane speed back to the campus, to any building that had a light inside. Eventually, I reached the library, where I waited out the rest of the night until the sun started rising. I have never come across this guy ever again, and I still don't know what his intentions were and what this entire encounter was about. We did not stay. For a large portion of my life, my dad and I used to visit the coast quite often. We were avid stunt kite enthusiasts and went to the ocean any chance we got. Be it a kite festival or just any old weekend. We usually either stayed at a hotel or motel, but a great deal of our trips were spent at a campsite. Due to high occupancy, we didn't stay at any of the places we had gone before and ended up driving around to find this one spot we passed on a previous trip that we thought looked cool. It was this small campground that even had its cove. Something you'd for the most part have to go on one of the native reservations to see. We didn't know the name of the place, but after a great deal of driving and maybe circling back once or twice, we eventually found it. It almost took a couple hours, but hey, it wasn't dark yet, so it could have been worse. At first everything seemed fine. There were at least like 7 different trailers parked in the grassy lot, and they were hooked up to power and a drain next to a lot more open spaces that looked perfect for our setup, which was just a mid-sized toy hauler from Jayco and our truck. My dad parked at the main office and told me to check if the door was locked since we couldn't see much light from where we were. I checked the door, and as suspected, it was locked. There wasn't any noise. I knocked on the door. The bell was either busted or just disconnected. It was an older wooden building in the same style as many of the other buildings around ocean shores. As I walked back to the truck a bit disappointed, I looked over to the garage that's a part of the main office building, and the door was just wide open. Although there were still no lights, a lot of old and new, really expensive tools and other materials were lying around, with some items even outside the garage. It was spring in Washington, and it had been cloudy all day. It was drizzling when we arrived. Why might they leave a brand new generator and tools exposed to the elements for an uncertain duration? There are no cameras or security systems anywhere either, so they could have easily been stolen too. As I reach our vehicle, my dad informs me that a truck is parked near the other building in the park, and upon closer inspection, I notice a light illuminated in that building. Thinking our luck had turned, we drove over, and this time Dad also got out to stretch his legs. I get to the driver's side of the truck to find nobody in it. I figured the person was probably just making a quick visit, so I knocked on the door before trying the handle, to no response. And another locked door. At this point I'm just annoyed because I knocked, called out to them, and got absolutely nothing. There are windows on the building, that's how we knew there were lights on, but they were higher up. This building was more like a small tower compared to the other one. I climbed on top of a stack of wood leaning against the wall to try to look inside. What I saw was a lightly furnished and carpeted almost studio apartment, but it didn't have a bathroom. It was at this point I started to feel a bit uncomfortable. There was no one inside. I start looking at some of the trailers parked around the campgrounds and realize none of their lights are on either. It wasn't until I started walking around that I noticed that some of the trailers had been there a lot longer than we thought. Same with the vehicles next to them. One was practically collapsing in on itself, and another had its door open. The inside wasn't much better than the other trailer. Some of them were older, some were newer. There were even a couple of tent trailers, a Chinook, and a Winnebago. But no people. No one at the beach in the cove, none in the bathroom building on the other side of the office, and ducking nobody manning that goddamn truck is still running outside that empty cabin tower thing. There was absolutely no one on the premises, which doesn't make sense. There were definitely people there at one point, but they couldn't have simply left without their belongings, much less their vehicles. The nearest town was about 5 miles away in the opposite direction. My dad had finally caught on to how ducking weird this all was and decided that we didn't need to continue being there anymore. We ended up going back to where we started and paid way more than what that motel room was worth for a few nights. But holy crap, what in the heck blast would have happened to us if we stayed? After we figured out the tower was locked, my dad even suggested we just hook up to a spot and wait for someone to come back and charge us. What if I had stupidly agreed to that before looking through that window? More importantly, what exactly happened to all those people? And where the hell was the guy who owned that truck? Note, this is a true story, but it happened 5 or 6 years ago. Chased in the woods. This story takes place many, many years ago. My grandparents own a cabin in northern Wisconsin, which we go to during the summer. To give an idea of the layout, when you pull in, you see the small cabin and then a long stretch of road that leads to a large garage that my grandpa built. Walking to that garage would take about 5 minutes. One day I decided to ride my ATV up and down the path between the cabin and the garage, which I usually did when I was there. At the beginning of my second lap, I see a large black dog. I didn't get a very good look at it, so that's all I know about it, but the next thing I know, it bolts out from the trees and chases me. I bring my ATV to max speed and haul toward the garage. I make it to the garage and do a sharp turn around the circular driveway, nearly tipping my ATV due to the high-speed turn and the weird angle that part of the driveway was on. I stopped and looked around for the dog, but I saw and heard absolutely nothing. It only takes a few seconds to cover that path by ATV, and the dog was plenty fast, so I was surprised it wasn't on my back already. I went top speed again and rode back to the cabin as fast as I could. I have told this story many times over the years, but recently it started to seem odd to me. I wasn't that far from where I saw the dog, so I find it odd that I lost it so easily, and when I really think about it, I don't think I even heard the dog bark even once. Now I know it was most likely just a dog, and that is it, but I can't help but feel there was something a bit wrong about the whole thing. What does everyone else think? Creepy encounter at a local park. I have to tell this story because I've been trying to figure out what was going on, and it's been consuming me. Just yesterday, I was walking at my local park, which I do fairly often. I visit my local park approximately 3 to 4 times a week. I've had situations happen here, but nothing to this extent. The park has 2 separate tracks. The track I was on goes around the soccer fields, and the curve around the track has a hill on one side that leads up to the soccer fields and the woods on the other side. I'm very aware of my surroundings when I'm walking on the back side because if you are back there alone, nobody is able to see you if anything happens. I had just come from the parking lot and was walking down to the back side. I noticed a man about 500 feet in front of me that I didn't pay much attention to because it's a walking track. The only detail that stood out to me was that he was wearing all black, a black hoodie and black jeans, despite the sunny weather and a temperature of 65 degrees. I walked down the hill and rounded the corner that leads back up to the parking lot, and I quickly noticed that the man was no longer in front of me. There was no way that he could have made it completely out of my sight by the time I went to round the corner. I started looking to my left to see if he had gone up the hill toward the soccer field but didn't see him. When I looked to my right, I noticed that he was standing behind a tree in a shallow part of the woods. At this point, he was probably about 10 feet from me. My stomach dropped, and I turned around and started running. The first thing I thought to do was call my boyfriend, who was working fairly close by. I ran all the way back up the track, and the only person I saw was an older man, whom I quickly told what just happened, and he pretty much laughed at me. When I turned around to point to where he was, the man was about 400 feet behind me, so I kept running. I ran back to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I noticed a car leave the parking lot, circle, and park in about 4 spots next to me. I could feel the man in the car just staring at me. Shortly after, my boyfriend arrived, and I was debating calling for help because I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid. There's a pavilion area in the middle of all of the baseball fields where I saw him standing for about 5 minutes until he started pacing back and forth on his phone on a nearby sidewalk. My boyfriend was standing at my car window, and I was telling him everything that had happened when the man started to walk towards my car. I panicked and told my boyfriend we needed to leave now, but he said nothing was going to happen with him standing at my window. He walked by my car with his phone to his ear almost as if he was recording me, because the second he turned onto the next sidewalk, he was off of the phone. Shortly after that, I left, and my boyfriend followed me home. I called the police and filed a report. There were lots of people at the park. It was 10:45 a.m., but unfortunately nobody was walking around this track at the time the incident happened. There was no reason for him to be standing in the woods right there at all. I keep thinking about the what ifs. What could have happened if I wasn't paying close enough attention and kept walking? I have no idea what the intention was, but it definitely did not feel right at all. This entire situation served as a reminder to me to always pay close attention to my surroundings, as you never know what people are capable of. I would have never considered myself a target for anything this situation could have led to, but unfortunately it can happen to anyone. The man is in the tree. I'm a 17-year-old male, and I live in the Netherlands. I'm not really the type of person who likes to wander in the woods, and especially not at night since I'm kind of paranoid when it comes to darkness. But whenever I leave my girlfriend's house, I have about 3 routes I can take. One route is the normal one, it's the fastest one to get home, and it leads through the city. Note, I don't have my driver's license, so I still have to bike everywhere. The second route is also through the city, but it's a bit of a detour, so I don't really like this route. The last route is almost as fast as the first route, but this route leads through a big part of the woods. Now, as you might have guessed, this story takes place cycling the route through those woods. Now the Netherlands isn't really known for its big woods or anything like that, but just outside the city we have a rather big forest. And since I live on the outskirts of the city, the route leads directly to past my house. Usually I leave my girlfriend's house at around 10:30 a.m. since I have to get up early for school the next morning, etc. Normally I just take the first route since it's the fastest and probably the safest. Now I do smoke, and since I don't want my parents to find out because I don't think they will be too thrilled about it, I only smoke when I'm out of the house. I do love to bike around listening to music and stuff since it's really peaceful, so when I'm feeling lucky, I take the route through the woods for a smoke and a music session. I took this route almost weekly for the past year and a half and never encountered anything. And even if I were to encounter something, I probably wouldn't even hear it because of the blasting music in my ears. On this particular night, it was a little later than usual because we had lost track of time. When I left the house of my girlfriends, it was around 11:15 a.m., and even though I was already late, I still took the route through the forest since I figured it wouldn't really matter anymore what time I returned home since I was already late. I was about halfway through but hadn't lit my cigarette yet, so I stopped in my tracks to light it. As I stepped onto the forest floor, I instantly regretted my decision because it had rained that day, making the ground wet and muddy, which caused me to step into a large puddle of water and mud. I lowered the volume of my music to properly light my cigarette and inspect my muddy shoe. Just as I was about to power the volume on my phone back on, I heard some twigs snapping. I froze for a second as I listened closely for any more sound. Of course, no more sounds followed. I shrugged it off and thought it may be some sort of animal. I listened one more time, but then again, I heard the sound of twigs snapping again. I quickly grabbed my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight. Looking back at this probably wasn't the best idea. I scanned the trees alongside the path but saw nothing. The sound of twigs snapping happened again, but this time it wasn't only the twigs snapping, but also a few leaves fell on me. I slowly looked at the overhanging branches above me as more leaves fell down, followed up by the sound of more twigs snapping. My phone's flashlight illuminated all the branches above me. As I scanned the trees again, this time looking higher up, I spotted something. Up in a tree was a crouched man wearing all black. His clothes were perfectly fine, and I could even make out the Nike logo on his sweater since it was white and kind of reflected. I absolutely lost my mind, but I could not move. My body just didn't let me move. I looked at the man in full disgust. What was this man doing up in some tree close to midnight? Why was he there? Was he waiting for me? Then the man jumped down from the tree. He was at least 3 meters up on a tree branch but jumped down without any bigger problems. He was now about 2 meters away from me, and I had no clue what to do. I could see he was holding something, but I couldn't see what it was exactly. Then, the man started to growl at me. He growled at me as if he were a dog. The man stepped forward in my direction. The moonlight reflected him a bit even though he was wearing all black. I could finally see what he was holding in his hand. He had a dead squirrel clamped in his hand, holding it by its tail. At that moment, I sprang onto my bike and ensured a swift departure, never glancing back. It is now 4 months later, and I have never cycled on that path anymore, not even in clear daylight. I kept this story to myself because I thought no one would believe me. A man following us after coming out of the woods. This happened only 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it often, and I know without a doubt I and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I'm a counselor that works for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorder, the mentally ill, and, to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. One aspect of my job with the developmentally delayed is similar to social worker. One thing I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their personal goals we set for that year, similar to an IEP in public schools. One of my patients wanted to learn to hike to strengthen herself, hypotonia. When I called to make my visit, she asked if she could show me she could hike now. I wanted to say, I believe you, lol, but she was excited. I packed my hiking shoes, and the next day I made the visit. She and I are actually similar ages, in our 40s. As we were walking the trail, we got to a point that was much more isolated. We were no longer walking the trail that loops around a neighborhood pond, with many people, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods and a cotton field. She and I were walking and talking when she suddenly stopped walking. I looked at her, and just as she was about to say, I have a bad feeling, I suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation that someone was watching us. Due to her development delays, I felt more concern for her welfare than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel fear. I felt a feeling of protecting her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of leaves crunching, and sure enough, a guy, who looked to be in his 30s, suddenly came out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping up towards us. There was no one else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creep up, I knew whatever he wanted was nefarious. I told her to continue walking, giving her a head start. I don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around, stopped, and looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, but as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I kept staring at him, and then I started to walk back towards my patient so he understood my eyes were on him. Then as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he disappeared as fast as he came. Back into the woods. If he were just wanting to walk this nature trail, Why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stared? Why wouldn't he just continue on his walk and pass us? This guy was clearly waiting and watching for a woman, or women, to go down the isolated trail. For him to come out of the woods when he did, it was clear to me that he was out hiding and stalking. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my feeling of being watched saved one or both of us from whatever that man had planned. Being hunted in the woods.
When I was in college, a few of my high school friends, I'll call them D, L, and K, and I still loved hanging out on weekends.
We would often sit in our local woods, buy alcohol, and have a few drinks together. On one Saturday in July, we decided to head out to a forest a few miles away. It was daylight, and we planned to explore as much of it as possible before it got dark. The forest was really dense in most places, and a lot of daylight would be shrouded in shadow even when the sun was at its highest, but it was calm and peaceful. The forest was located behind a prison, which added some fear, but seeing as it was daylight, we didn't think about it much. Once we stepped into the forest, we pushed our way through the dense trees for around 45 minutes. We were chatting away and just catching up as friends do. Not long after, we saw something through the trees in the near distance, and when we reached it, we noticed it was a fully built small cabin. It was a hexagonal shape with thick log walls and sticks and mud for a roof. We noticed a huge deep fire pit next to the cabin and trash everywhere. It looked as though it was recently used. We were unsettled, but it was daylight, and the forest was calm. We shared thoughts about who could have built it and even suggested an escaped prisoner had wandered into the forest after escaping. Looking back on it now, an escaped prisoner wouldn't hide in the forest behind the prison and build a cabin. We were young and, I guess, excited about a mystery. The cabin didn't have a door, so we knew there wasn't anything inside. We did head inside, though, to see what we could see, and when we all stepped in, we noticed a bunch of tools hanging on the log walls. Rusty saws, hammers, and screwdrivers. This unsettled us more, and we debated leaving before whoever built this returned. But because we were young adults, and there were 4 of us, we thought we'd be okay and decided to not just stay but to take these tools and head even deeper into the forest in an attempt to build our own cabin. After a few hours we had only put up a few logs before we got bored. We decided to call it a day and head back home, but we left the tools where we had started building our cabin and neglected to return them. Fast forward a week, and we decided to head back to the forest and find that cabin to see if anything had changed. Before we set out, we bought a load of hairspray and marshmallows from our local store so we could build a fire in the fire pit we found. When we got to the forest, it was quite late, and the sun was starting to set. This was the plan so we could have a glowing fire in the dark with our drinks and snacks. When we reached the cabin, we noticed it had been completely destroyed. All the logs were torn down across the site. We debated what could have happened, but we figured that when the person or people who built it returned and found their tools had disappeared, they decided to tear down their cabin because it had been found. We were worried about someone coming back when the fire had lit, but we still wanted to stick to the plan as much as possible. Because the forest was so dense, we decided to move to a different site and hope the forest would conceal us as much as possible. We walked for around 30 minutes to a new spot, dug a pit, and lit our fire. For a while we had a great time. We had a few drinks, roasted marshmallows, and my friend L, who brought his guitar, played us a few songs. After an hour or so, we saw flashlights between the trees some distance away, followed by shouting. We noticed there were a few men heading towards us, but because the forest was so dense, it was slowing them down. We looked at each other and tried to come up with an idea. We knew the forest would be too hard to navigate in the dark, especially to the south, where it became even thicker and we'd be cornered. I and D really wanted to run, but L and K thought they'd be caught anyway and were going to try to either hide in the area or reason with them. I and D ran for it. We didn't want to head to either side of the men because they would cut us off, so the only option was south. Into deeper and thicker forest. We had a flashlight of our own, but we tried to hide as much of the light as possible so the men following would either lose us or not see us. After a grueling 20 minutes of running through thick forest, which has scratched almost every part of our bodies, we came to a barbed wire farmer's fence. We looked back and couldn't see anything, but we could hear the men in the distance. We knew we didn't have long, and this fence went on and on both ways. We decided to climb the fence in the hope the men wouldn't follow, so both of us started to climb. I managed to take my hoodie from around my waist and cover some of the barbed wire, but inevitably some of it did cut us. We managed to make it over to the other side, and instead of continuing south, we decided to travel along the fence until we found a way back through and around the men. We had no idea what was happening to L and K, and we debated calling the police when we were able, but we weren't meant to be lighting fires and didn't want to get into trouble. After a while we came across a section we could hop over safely and into a less dense part of the forest. We had no signal on our phones and couldn't call either L or K to see if they were okay. We continued a little while longer and came across an exit to the forest. We couldn't hear anything from behind us, but we could now see some houses in the distance. We decided to head to the house and wait under the street lamps before deciding what to do next, but as we got closer, we saw that K and L were already standing under a street lamp near the houses. We ran up to them and asked them what had happened. They went on to say that they decided to hide because L had his guitar and couldn't effectively run with it, and it worked. The men arrived at the fire just as K and L hid behind some logs just outside the firelight. They said the men looked to be a lot older than us and seemed very aggressive with what they thought were crowbars or something similar. As the men were shouting for us and talking, L and K managed to make their escape. As they were walking towards the edge of the forest, they noticed a pickup truck parked on a logging trail with its headlights on but no one inside. We think this was their truck. They then ran out and towards the local houses, where they found us. We went back to that forest a few more times, but never ventured as deep and only went during the day. Someone ran at me from the woods. Okay, this is kind of a short one and not super interesting. But I was living at my grandmother's with my dad and my sister about 10 years ago, and I went to hang out with a buddy of mine. His mom dropped me off, and it was late at night, and for some reason we always went inside through the back door. I go around and get up on the back porch, and the back porch is facing some nearby woods. As I'm about to get the door unlocked, I hear footsteps as if someone is running, and they're heading in my direction. I panicked and turned my head to see only a dark silhouette coming towards me. I immediately panic and start fumbling with my keys. I hear their footsteps thumping against the wood of the porch just as I manage to unlock the door and quickly turn around and slam it shut. I was absolutely terrified, and I didn't know what to think, so I went to tell my dad, and he shrugged it off. So I did too, but later that night my sister said she heard tapping on one of the living room windows, but she was too scared to check. Thinking back on it, I am unsure of what might have happened if I didn't unlock the door in time. Would I have been kidnapped or ended even? It's given me a big irrational fear of living near an area with a forest. I always worry someone or something might emerge from the darkness. The man in the woods. This happened to me a few years back. I live in a suburban neighborhood that borders a large park, part of which is public and the rest is a closed-off reservoir. The public section of the park is sprawling over several acres. There are hiking trails in the woods, a baseball field, basketball and tennis courts, and a playground area. The park is accessible by car via a winding one-lane road that goes through the playground area and around to more remote sections in the woods. Eventually, this road leads out to a major, busy highway. At one point, it was used as a cut-through to get from the highway to my neighborhood and beyond. Nowadays, there are several much larger access points to the neighborhood, and the cut-through is seldom used. My story begins on a late winter afternoon. I was spending the day at home with my now ex-husband, who was an avid runner. He decided to go out on foot into the park to take a run down the one-lane road. He did this often, and the crime rate in this area is extremely low, so I thought nothing of it. After about an hour or so, he comes back all sweaty. I asked him how the run went and his time per mile, etc. He tells me he was slower than usual that day and just wasn't feeling very well during the run. As he's heading to the shower to rinse off, he casually says, "Oh, I heard this dog whimpering in the woods when I was running." I am a bleeding heart for wounded animals and asked him for more specifics. He said he had not gone to look for the whimpering dog because the noise had stopped shortly after it started. He then said the last thing we need is another pet and went off to shower. I sat there for a bit, looking at my 3 dogs lying on the floor and lazily pawing at each other. After a few moments, I couldn't stand it anymore, so I laced up some tennis shoes, grabbed some treats, and headed to my car. My husband was just getting out of the shower by then, and I told him I was going to look for the dog. He said I was crazy but didn't try to stop me, nor did he want to go back out with me. By now, daylight was fast fading, and it was close to 5:30 p.m. The spot he'd heard the whimpering was about 2 minutes from our house. I drove over and pulled my car into the shoulder so as not to block the lane. I got out and started calling for the dog, "Here doggy," and other similar phrases to see if it'd start whimpering again or come out to greet me. I heard nothing, so after a minute or so, I decided to venture out into the woods. The woods in this area of the park are not too dense, with trees spaced at least 8 to 10 feet apart on average, and the forest floor was blanketed with fallen leaves. Every step I made was a loud crunch. I'd stop, call out, and be still for a bit, and then slowly move further into the woods. I thought I could hear a dog whimper once or twice, but it always happened as I was calling out, so I couldn't be sure. The further I walked, the less light there was, and the denser the trees became. I had brought my cell phone, but this one didn't have a flashlight app at the time. I'd been out there walking, calling, and stopping for about 20 minutes when I came upon a small clearing. I've always been fascinated by the occult, but all the stories I'd read did not prepare me for what I saw in that clearing. The first thing that caught my eye was this formation of sticks laid out on the ground. The sticks were all of the same size and formed a small circle. Inside the circle, there were 3 more sticks propped up in a tripod formation in the center. On top of the tripod was a small doll's head with the eyes missing from their sockets. I immediately had this oh duck moment where I realized that I was a woman alone in the woods at dusk, with no form of protection on me, and in a spot where I clearly was not meant to be. I froze in place as I surveyed the surroundings. To make myself less scared, I called out again softly this time, "Come here, puppy." There were small bones in a pile at the far edge of the clearing. A bush to my left had several more gouged doll heads hanging from the branches. It was not windy that day, but I swear I heard the rustling of leaves that last time I called out for the lost dog. As I scanned the perimeter from left to right, my eyes suddenly fixed for a split second across the clearing on something in the trees. There, about 8 to 10 feet back in the bushes, was a man's face. I kept my eyes moving because something told me not to let him know I'd seen him by staring or reacting in any way. The brief moment I glanced at him was enough to momentarily paralyze me. His hair was long and unkempt, his eyes were bulging almost as he stared at me. I couldn't see the rest of him because of the tree cover. At this point, my flight response finally kicked in, and I was able to move again. I remember saying something to the effect of "silly dog must have found his way home" as I started to back out of the clearing, still scanning. He didn't appear to be pursuing me, so as soon as I was half hidden by trees on my side, I took off running at full speed to my car. I couldn't tell how long it took or how far it was, but daylight was all but gone by now. I somehow made it back to the road, a few yards behind where my car was parked. I sprinted to it and locked myself inside. It took me 4 attempts to get my key in the ignition with how badly my hands were trembling. I finally got the car started and beat it the hell out of there. Took the long way home to my house by going out to the main highway and entering my neighborhood through another well-traveled intersection. As soon as I was home, I called the police to report what I'd seen. They never followed up with me. The more I've thought on this over the years, I'm convinced that the man in the woods was the one whimpering to lure a gullible victim like me off the little road and into the woods. Stranger in my backyard. A few weeks ago, on a Saturday night, I let my dog Riley into the backyard. He was out there for about 10 minutes, so I opened the back door to call him inside. He didn't come inside, which was weird because he usually did. So, I closed the back door and waited. After about 5 or so minutes I opened the back door to let him in. "Riley?" I called. No response. "Riley, come inside, night night." Again, no response. This is where things get weird. I whistled for him, and then, from the other side of the yard, I heard someone whistle back, the same exact whistle I had whistled. "What the duck?" I muttered under my breath. I thought it was just my imagination, so I whistled again and again. The person whistled back. I shut the door and locked it. I went to my grandparents' bedroom and looked out the window. I saw nothing. I went back to the kitchen where the back door was and flipped the porch light on. I went back to the bedroom and looked out the window. Again, there was nothing to be seen. After that, I decided to go to the living room and tell my grandparents what happened. My grandpa told me to grab a flashlight and Riley's leash and check it out. He said the whistling was probably just the neighbors across the alley. I grabbed a flashlight and Riley's leash and turned the porch light off because I was afraid of what I might see with it on, so afraid that I didn't even plan to use the flashlight. I am a small and skinny 16-year-old male, and I am not that good at fighting. As soon as I stepped out into the cold dark night, I wished I would have gone to my room and grabbed my baseball bat. Slowly, I made my descent of the porch steps. I know I am sounding like a little wuss in this story, but the situation is scary. Once last year, in the middle of the night, I heard someone slam the cellar door shut. That scared me so bad, but I was even more scared now. I stopped on the second to last step and looked around the yard. I finally got enough courage to call out. "Riley?" I called. Then, from right behind me, I heard a soft voice whisper, "Riley." I turned to see a face peering at me from under the porch. I couldn't even scream. The face peering at me was a crazed face. It looked like a crackhead, which is common where I live. I ran up a few stairs, kicked the dude in the face through the spaces between them so he couldn't grab at me, and ran inside. I told my grandpa what happened, and he got his gun and came back out with me. We searched the whole yard, no sign of the crazy guy nor my dog Riley. The back gate was wide open, and there was blood on the stair that the man's face was at. The blood was from me kicking him. The cops were called, of course, and I explained everything to them. After the cops spoke to me, they left. Haven't heard anything from them since. The next morning we found Riley standing in a random driveway, which was good. My guess as to what happened is that the crazy man was already in my yard when I let Riley out, and he was on some other side of the yard where Riley didn't notice him. Riley must have realized that the gate was open and proceeded to explore the area. It was a pretty terrifying experience, and I'm glad that my dog wasn't hurt. Creepy man in park. This happened a couple of years ago to me and two other friends, 21 female, we were probably 17 at the time. It was summer, and we had plans to go to our friend's house. There is a park located halfway between my house and my friend's house, so my friends and I decided it would be nice to sit in a hut in the park and smoke on our way to her house. This was in the evening, so it was getting dark already, and as time passed, it was dark enough for the streetlights to turn on. It's important for the story to explain a bit how the hut was in the park. The park was shaped like a big circle around a lake. So the hut we sat at had two entrances from the left and right sides, these entrances then connected to the main park path. The hut is open air and features bench seats arranged in a circle, covered by a roof, if that makes sense. Anyways, the street lights on the right side were not working, so it was extremely dark on that side. My friends and I are chatting away, and people are walking past like normal, nothing strange. Then this man comes from the left and is walking really slowly. Now normally this wouldn't catch my attention, but it's the summer, remember, and he had on a long, thick trench coat with a top hat that had a feather and sunglasses. He walked slowly into the dark and stood there, I could see his silhouette. At this point, all of my friends are quiet as well, and we are feeling uneasy because we are all girls. Then the man begins to walk back towards the street light, which is located on the left side. He stands there for a couple seconds staring again, and then he proceeds to walk slowly down the path to the hut, still staring at us. We initially thought he might walk through to scare us, but that was not the case. He then sits down in front of us and begins to talk. For context, we live in Brussels, so he started speaking French and said, "What a lovely evening, ladies." We speak and understand French, but in that moment we knew it was smarter to pretend we don't, so we just say, "Sorry, English." You can see him get agitated and mad. He starts going on this whole rant about how we should speak the language of the country. Stupid English people think they are better than everyone else. As I said, he was quite mad while I was saying all this. I began saying to my friends we should probably leave now, our friend is expecting us at her house soon. Since my other friends were also scared, as soon as I suggested leaving, they agreed and began walking towards the main park path, but they forgot their bags and belongings. I had to call them back, like, "Guys, your bags," and they came running back, and while we were quickly gathering our things, he was just staring at us. We got our things and started walking when suddenly we heard, Hey, come back here." We turned around to see him holding up the can of Coke my friend had left, and he said we should not litter and to come back and throw it away. We began to run at this moment and didn't look back. We were thoroughly unsettled and frightened throughout the entire journey to my friend's residence, believing that he might be in pursuit of us, and we became panicked at the sight of anyone approaching from behind. We feared he had his hands in his pockets, but when he raised the Coke can, something shiny was in his hand. None of us could clearly identify the object, but we assumed it was a knife based on its shape, the way it reflected light, his behavior, the fact that he kept his hand in his pocket, and his calls for us to come back. Since that encounter, we have never seen that man again, and all of us now refuse to go around that area at night. Really scared us. I know this story might not be as creepy of an encounter as some of the others on here, but this has stuck with me and my friends for a while, that he has been named Hat Man. We're not sure what that man would have done if we had stayed longer or had come back to throw the Coke can out, but I'm glad we didn't find out. Be safe out there, you never know people's intentions, and if you have listened to the whole thing, thank you for taking the time. I was on a hike in East Sussex last summer. I was walking along a footpath and passed an old man sitting on the ground, leaning against a small barbed wire fence. I walked past him, maybe about to say hi as you do, but he didn't acknowledge me. As I got further down the path, he yelled something unintelligible. I looked back, and he wasn't saying anything. I didn't think much of it and carried on with my walk, presuming I wouldn't be back that way since it was a circular route. About halfway along the trail, I found that the footpath along the river was closed, and the next one I could take to continue the walk was miles ahead. To reach it, I'd have had to walk along a dodgy narrow road, so I decided to turn back and head to the end point the same way I came. Eventually, I returned to the part of the path where I'd first seen the man. He wasn't there at first, but then I noticed someone near the gate holding a huge stick, almost like you'd hold a lollipop sign. It was the same guy from before. A good few hours later, I walked past him, and he stared at me as I opened the gate. After a few seconds of walking onwards, he yelled something unintelligible again. I turned around to look at him and said, "Sorry, what?" And he replied angrily, "Keep walking, sunshine," while staring at me very intensely. I got freaked out and speed walked back to the train station. It's not the creepiest story, but it was really odd, especially the fact he'd been on that path for a few hours, since the walk was about 20 miles that day. I still wonder what he was doing. He didn't look homeless either, he was very well kept. Anyway, does anyone have any stories weirder or creepier than that? Someone in the woods. This happened a few weeks ago to me and my friend. We live on a college campus in a smaller dorm that is right next to a cemetery and some train tracks. From some of our windows, you can see the cemetery and tracks, they are very close. We often walk along the tracks or wander around the cemetery at night for fun because the tracks are not active anymore. One night my friend and I decided to walk along the tracks and smoke a legal substance I had just gotten, wormwood. It's the same stuff that they use to flavor absinthe and is supposed to give you wacky dreams and a mild relaxed feeling. We also used one of those cheap gas station pens that get you a little high. We were trying to reach the train tracks located across the street, but we encountered a police officer. Although our actions were not illegal, we wanted to avoid any complications, so we ended up taking a mile-long walk to find another way to access the tracks. By this time, she was pretty high, and I had taken a few hits of the pen but was feeling nothing. I have a pretty high tolerance, especially for those pen things. Also yes, this is important to the story. We finally found an entrance to the tracks through a hole in the fence of a parking lot very close to our dorm. As we were walking along the dimly lit rows of cars, we saw the entrance to the tracks and how it immediately went into a very dark, densely wooded area with large embankments on either side of the railroad. We paused in the parking lot, now thoroughly sketched out, and were not too sure if it was a good idea to go wandering through this dark tunnel alone. We then saw some people further down the parking lot heading our way and felt better. Now to our left were the tracks, and to our right was the road, but between us and the road was a very steep embankment full of dense trees on the other side of a chain-link fence. Before we could get onto the tracks, we heard something slide down the embankment. We froze and locked eyes on where the noise had come from. The tussling of leaves continued faintly, but by this point we assumed it was a squirrel or some other animal. That was until the rustling grew in volume, and it became apparent that the creature was no animal but a human. It had come down the steep bank and was now at the chain-link fence. We could hear distinct footsteps and rustling that would be impossible for any animal native to the city to make. We backed away quickly from the entrance of the tracks and stared in horror as we both came to the realization this was a person making their way along the fence. We saw the people who had been coming toward us earlier reach where we were standing, thankful someone else was around. However, the group continued towards the hole in the fence and crawled through, seemingly unaware of the loud thuds and rustling sounds creeping along the fence. Now keep in mind, my friend was high, and I was definitely impaired but still capable of decent judgment. My friend didn't want to be alone in the parking lot, so she suggested following the people, but said the people were a group of 5 to 6 frat guys in a dark tunnel of trees, so I vetoed that notion. She still wanted to get into the trees so we could finish smoking our wormwood out of the view of the public, but at this point, I was not keen on being anywhere no one could see us. The rustling and footsteps were still louder than ever. We spotted another group of people coming our way. This group too passed us and went through the hole, paying no mind to whoever was lost in the bushes right next to them. We then both had the idea that we possibly were hallucinating this. However, none of the substances we were currently using had any solid evidence to suggest they could cause experiences like this. And we were both hearing it, clear as day. There was someone over there, the chain link was jingling, and there were footsteps. At this point we had been standing there for almost 10 minutes, this noise continuing the entire time. We both concluded that the noise was likely from someone trying to get high in peace, just like us, so we dove through the hole and went in the opposite direction of the other people, choosing to sit on a bridge instead. We could still hear the jingling of the fence behind us and the crunch of dry leaves but tried to ignore it while keeping an eye out for anyone going through the hole. But we saw nothing. We still couldn't build up the courage to go back that way and ended up wandering around for another hour trying to find our way back to the dorm and avoid whoever had been rummaging around in the leaves for 20 minutes. Kind of an anticlimactic story, I know, but it was still absolutely terrifying at the time. We went back to that area in the morning, and the hill is steep. The steep hill has a 90-degree angle and is completely surrounded by 6-foot chain link, so it's really concerning that someone was down there in the first place. Also that no one else was even slightly alarmed by the commotion. Maybe we really were just hearing things. I was camping with 3 mates in the Lake District a few years ago. We found a good spot, but one of us had to camp slightly higher than the rest, and I said I didn't mind doing that. We were well hidden, but if you came across our campsite, you'd only see my tent until you got right up close to us, and then you'd be able to see the other 3. Anyway, we had a few drinks and chilled for a bit, and then I went to sleep about 12-ish. I woke up just after 4 in the morning and could hear something outside moving about. I didn't think too much of it at first, but it kept happening, so I finally thought I'd have a little look, just zipping the tent down a bit, so I did that, but still couldn't see anything. However, the noise persisted, prompting me to step out of the tent for a closer inspection. As soon as I stood upright, I noticed a man standing approximately 6 feet in front of me, staring at me. I was hit with shock and a bit of fear, which made me half angry because of the fright, so I asked him what the hell he was doing, sneaking around the tents, and the scary bastard just stood there staring at me. I threatened to hit him, partly out of fear and partly just pure adrenaline, and as I said that, I heard a zip going on one of my mate's tents, and so did the weird fellow, who just started running away when he realized I wasn't on my own. I think about it all the time, and it comes up fairly often when we tell camping stories. Not exactly in a forest, but it started in a wooded area. This must have happened around 2007 when I was 18 or 19, because I had graduated high school but had not yet gotten my own place. My friend Zach and his brother Chris had their apartment. Naturally, I was there all the time. One such night, around 2 or 3 a.m., we decided we needed snacks, so we decided to walk to a nearby gas station, cutting through a small wooded area to get there. Cutting through the woods again on our way back to the apartment, I noticed a man walking the opposite direction. He was of average height but very stocky and strong looking. He was wearing a black zip-up hoodie with the hood up over a hat and had a long red beard. He looked to be only a few years older than us. He was staring intently at me as he walked past. "Geez, what was that guy's problem?" I said to Chris. "What guy?" he responded. I turn around to point him out and notice that he has moved to our left side, where he was on our right when he first passed. Also, he was now facing our direction. I mentioned something about this to Chris and Zach, and we pick up our pace. I turn around again to see if he's still there. This time he's peeking out from behind a tree, watching us. "Shit," I say, "I think that guy is following us. A guy follows you in the woods late at night, it can't be good." I turn around again, and he's jogging toward us. He shouts out to us. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" We tell him that we were just coming from the gas station. He responds with something along the lines of us being liars and that we must be up to no good. At this point he's walking next to us. Chris tells him that we don't do anything but drink Coke and play video games. "Oh, so you do Coke," he says. We come out of the woods and are in sight of the apartment, but this is where it went from creepy to terrifying. He jumps in front of us, blocking our paths. He calls us liars again, looks past us, and says, "Isn't that right, guy's name?" I turn around and see 2 more men walking quickly towards us. I have no idea where they came from. We were so focused on the beard guy that we didn't see or hear anything else until then. Another voice calls something out, and there are 2 more guys next to the beard guy. The beard guy points to me and accuses me of robbing his apartment. The 5 of them form a semicircle around the 3 of us. I deny any robbery, but the bearded guy, whom I have never seen before, says he would recognize me anywhere. Beard guy says, "I'm getting my money back," and begins to pull something out of his pocket. We run. One of the others grabs from me but misses. We run around the corner towards the apartment and decide that it's not a good idea to go in because we don't want them to know where my friends live. We ran for a while longer until we thought we lost them, then went back to the apartment. Zach called the cops, but they never came. I think it's because he told them that mysterious people appeared from the trees, which is not an inaccurate description but doesn't convey the seriousness of the situation. We didn't see them again after that, but we were shaken up for a while. I don't know what might have happened if we didn't get away. My strangest scary encounter yet. I've always been a person that has weird things happen to them. It's not a matter of if something is going to happen, it's when. Because of this, I've become pretty aloof when it comes to interacting with the world, maintaining in it is what it is mentality. However, I feel like I was justified in being freaked out about this incident in particular. I am rarely scared, but this did scare me. The setting was a typical scary story setting, 11:30ish at night, pitch dark outside, and hardly anyone on the roads. I was freshly 18 and driving, on my way back from a 6-hour shift at work, and had pulled into a 24-hour fast food drive-thru. I live out of town, and I knew I'd be too tired to make myself something once I got home. Plus, I was starving. Nothing out of the ordinary happened while I was getting my food. There was nobody else around, and I and the drive-through worker seemed to be the only ones currently awake. What I assumed was his car was the only one in the parking lot, and it was parked close to the employee exit/entrance, which is almost right next to the exit of the drive-through. I get my food, bid the guy a good night, then pull into the nearest parking spot fresh out of the drive-through, which is literally right in front of it, though there's enough space between it and the exit for a car to get by. I parked the car and began setting myself up for the drive home, unwrapping my wrap and putting my straw in my drink, the usual. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the headlights of a vehicle pull into the parking lot from the farthest entrance. The fast food restaurant shares a parking lot with a vacant building that used to be a Sears, and people are free to use that entrance as well. I pay it no mind, figuring someone else had the same idea as me, and go back to setting myself up. For a solid minute, I'm getting myself situated before I suddenly get the feeling that I'm not alone. I look up in time to see the same vehicle pull up right next to my car, literally the next parking space over. Mind you, the parking lot is completely empty. They could have parked anywhere else, yet they chose to pull up right next to my tiny little car, which felt more like an insect compared to the massive black truck they were in. In this moment, I jump into defensive mode and immediately start taking note of everything I can see about this truck. It's completely black, the back windows are tinted, but there's enough lighting that I can see the silhouettes of 2, maybe 3, passengers in the back seat. In the front seat are the driver, who is obscured by the darkness, and the passenger, whose door is almost snug up against my driver's door. He's tall and lanky, wearing a baseball hat and a face mask, one of the black paper ones, and has a hoodie on with the hood pulled up over his head and hat. For a few moments, I just sit there, staring, and the passenger of the truck is looking at me. I can feel it, and I'm majorly creeped out and uncomfortable, yet frozen in place. The truck has pulled into park. I could hear the gear change and saw the driver move accordingly. I and the passenger just stared at one another through our windows. My brain was screaming at me to move, but I couldn't, my hand still in the process of unwrapping my food. I wasn't a pretty sight. My hair was slicked back with sweat into a ponytail, my shift had absolutely wiped the floor with me, and anyone could tell just by looking at me, and I was wearing my glasses that I use when I drive, nearsighted issues and astigmatism. The longer we sat there, the more my brain screamed at me to move and stop staring at this guy. I've been in enough situations where I know that my fear response, unfortunately, is to freeze, and that was exactly what I had done. That was until the passenger moved. In just a few seconds, many events unfolded. The passenger moved and opened his door and began the process of getting out. My body finally kicked into gear right as I heard my brain audibly tell me, "Nope. Go," and I listened. I yanked the car into drive and sped out of there, one hand still holding my wrap, the other gripping the steering wheel and swerving to get the duck out of there. As I exited the parking lot, I looked back through the window and saw the passenger getting back into the truck. I didn't look long enough to see if they'd left or not, considering there was a traffic light coming up, but I'm assuming they did. I probably broke multiple speeding laws getting the hell out of there, but I didn't care. I immediately messaged my friend and told her what happened. I knew she'd be asleep, and then called my boyfriend at the time, who'd been waiting up for me so we could talk once I got off work. He picked up, and I told him what happened. He could tell I was serious because of the tone of my voice, and he asked if I was okay. I stayed on the phone with him the entire way back to my house and kept looking over my shoulder, suspicious of any headlights that might be following me. Thankfully, once I got off the highway and onto the back roads towards my house, I live on a farm, nobody was following me. I bid my boyfriend goodnight once I turned off the car, got inside, ate my food, and immediately went to bed, too tired to stress over the situation any more than I already had. When I told my mom about it in the morning, she just said, "Yeah, he was trying to talk to you," which, well, duh. She wasn't very sympathetic to my stress, for whatever reason, so I just brushed it off and continued with my day, and then my life. However, my friend, whom I had messaged the previous night, freaked out enough for both me and my mother. She called me the moment she woke up and saw my message to make sure I was okay. Even now, months later, she still mentions it whenever the topic comes up, and honestly, I'm grateful she cares as much as she does. My mom's reaction made me feel like I was overreacting, even though logically I knew I wasn't. Freeze is still my automatic fear response, and I'm doing everything possible to fix it. I'd rather not be put in that position again. My last night alone. In the early 1990s, which would have made me 10 to 12 years of age at the time, I can't remember the exact year, I had the scare of my life. I lived in rural Missouri, and the closest neighbors were miles away. Anyway, we lived right next to my grandparents on 200 acres of land 10 miles from any city in all directions. My mother worked nights, my father wasn't in the picture, and my grandparents just left for vacation to North Carolina. My sister was super young, so my mother arranged for her to stay at her friend's house for the week, and I had somehow talked my mother into letting me stay home alone from 3 p.m. to around 12 a.m. until she got home from work. Monday came, and it was time for Mom to go to work. She called me in and gave me the keys and rules for my grandparents' house in case of an emergency since we didn't have a phone. I had her work number and 911, which made me mad because I was like, Mom, really? I know how to dial 911. I spent all day Monday playing video games and listening to my music too loud for my family's liking, but I finally got my first taste of freedom, and I was going to enjoy it like any preteen would. Everything was fine till around dusk when I started hearing noises but didn't really think much about it because when you live in the country so secluded, every noise you hear is 100x louder because it's so quiet. I turned off my music sometime around 9-ish or maybe 10 and sat down to watch a movie, and if you had one guess, what did I watch? You got it, Home Alone. About halfway through the movie I started hearing banging, which I thought was coming from underneath the house because we had a lot of cats, some of which were wild, and sometimes they would fight and make loud thud sounds. I paused the movie and went to look outside to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't make out anything, so I headed back to my room when I thought I heard the back doorknob turning, so I turned back around and headed to the back of the house, which faced a bunch of trees and open land as far as you could see. By the time I reached the back of the house, I was certain I had seen the doorknob move, but I knew Mom wasn't expected home for another 2 hours. Thinking nothing of it, I went back into my room and started the movie back up and still heard many thuds and bumps and what I thought was a doorknob turning, but I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me and blew it off, and before I knew it, my mom was home and asked me how my day was. I remember thinking that if I wanted to stay home alone again, I needed to say everything was good except for the cats fighting and banging into things. To this, she replied, "You kids and your cats," and then we both headed to bed. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the doorknob moving, and although I felt I should tell my mom, I convinced myself to stay quiet, unaware of what was about to happen when she left for work. At about sundown I got the smart idea, most likely from the Home Alone movie, to put something on the back porch so I could see if anyone had been standing on it. So I grabbed a brand new bag of flour and dumped it all over the place and went back into the house and double locked the door. Went into my room and started jamming out and playing games, and just like that, it was pitch dark outside. Turned the music off and started to read a Goosebumps book when it started again, the thuds and bangs, and I was like, stupid cats. Then I heard the sound that scared the crap out of me, and it still makes the hair on my arms stand up as I write this. The back door was violently being pulled and pushed, which sounded like someone trying to knock down the wall. Like a foolish child, I went to the back of the house and saw the doorknob moving for sure this time, so I reached for it to check if it was locked, and when I looked up, I saw something entirely in black. That's all I saw. I was scared, it looked right at me. I didn't see a face because they had a hoodie on, and this scared the crap out of me. I screamed I had a gun and knew how to use it, to which I heard a thud. I thought this person didn't care. I said I had a gun and was still going to break in. I listened for what seemed like a lifetime to this guy trying to get in. I went back to the door, and whoever it was helped himself to one of our deck chairs as if he were tired. When they saw me, they started banging and kicking the back door again, so that's when I thought I had to make it to my grandparents' house and call my mom. I went to my room, got the keys and phone numbers, and returned to the back door to check if they were still there. They were, and they seemed to get angry every time they saw me. I finally went to the front door, which they didn't have sight of, and timed the thuds on the door. Thud. Every 3 seconds. I was like, the next time I'm going. Now mind you, I've always been a really fast runner, and when I made it to high school, I went to state in multiple sprint events. Then, I swung open the door, leapt down the 4 steps, and sprinted off. I don't even think my older self ran as fast as I did that night to my grandparents' place, which was about a city block away. When I hit their porch, I heard keys coming toward me like in someone's pocket. I was at the door, and the key was in. Bingo. I'm in. I closed the door and double lock it, and lucky for me, the deadbolt wasn't locked. About the time the deadbolt locks, I hear steps on my grandparents' deck and banging on the door. I pick up the phone and dial my mom's work, which was bad because she forgot to write down the extension number, and no one was in the front office at 10 to 11 p.m. Now this is where I did wrong, but I was a kid and scared. I called my best friend, and his mom picked up. Hello, yeah, it's Brian. Brian, do you know what time it is? I said yes. I'm sorry, but someone is breaking into my house, and they ran after me to my grandparents' house. She said, Brian, I'll be there in 10. Hide, I'm calling the cops. Now mind you, my tiny town of 917 doesn't have a 24-hour cop on duty, so the closest one was probably 20 miles away. I hid for what seemed like hours, and my best friend's mom and dad made record-breaking time from their house to ours, which I've tried to do in my Mustang and couldn't. They did it in a farm truck. My friend's dad was yelling, "Brian, it's us, let us in," and I unlocked the door, and the mom grabbed me because, of course, I was crying and tried to calm me while Gary, my friend's dad, went to end someone if he found them. Needless to say, he didn't. About 10 minutes later the police showed up, followed by my mom. Anyway, the cops told my mom they found tracks in the flower I put down on the porch, which I got into trouble over because she said if I knew I saw something, I should have said something and not tried to act out a stupid movie. 3 or 4 cops showed up and worked the case and found where whoever it was had parked on a road about 1/4 mile through the forest of our backyard. They found the waist-high grass knocked over and a pile of smoked cigarettes on the tree line, and the scariest part was as they walked the path, whoever it was who made it through the high grass, they found a hunting knife, which my mother didn't tell me about until I was much older. To my knowledge, no one was ever caught, and I never stayed home alone again until I was almost 18 and we had a phone. I often dream of this night and wonder what if. What if I were a terrible runner? What if there were 2 people and I only saw one? What if they had gotten in? This still scares me today. I am 37 years old and have a 10-year-old son who wants to stay home alone, but you guessed it, that is not going to happen. Creepiest experience I've ever had while driving. My brother, 25 male, and I, 23 female, were driving home from the Watershed Festival in Washington. We were driving back around 3 a.m. through the gorge a bit outside of Portland. If you're not familiar with this area, the highway runs right along a river, and you're surrounded by trees. Since it was 3 a.m., there were no other cars in sight, just pitch black. My brother and I were listening to a true crime podcast, which definitely contributed to the mood, regrettably. There are no cars around us until we suddenly see a car up in front of us. When they see us, they suddenly turn on their right turn signal and pull off the 2-lane road. My brother found this odd, but I thought, hey, maybe they just don't want us behind them. Fair enough. I realized very quickly this wasn't the case because once they pulled back onto the road behind us, they suddenly sped up until they were right on our tail. They then moved into the left lane and cut back into the right lane in front of us. Odd, but I've seen weirder. This is where things take a turn. Once they've cut in front of us, they put on their right turn signal again and pull off. Now my brother and I are getting a little creeped out because keep in mind it is pitch black outside, there are no other cars, and you can really only go one direction. We pass them again, and I tell my brother to move into the left lane and just keep going. Once we pass them, they pull back onto the road again. They speed up in the right lane until they are about 500 feet behind us. I'm keeping an eye on them in the rearview mirror. They suddenly switch their lights off. My skin crawled. We have no idea where they are, but we know they're behind us. Suddenly our car's blind spot monitor goes off, and we know their car is right by us. The car suddenly switches their lights back on and speeds past us. By this point we saw another car's headlights coming behind us, and a sigh of relief washed over me. We didn't see the car again after that. I'm 99.9% sure it was just some bored teenager trying to give us the creeps, and they did a great job, but I sometimes wonder if they had other intentions. Chased through the woods at night by an unknown man. So, during my first year at university, I lived on campus. At the time, despite being a student, I seldom partied or drank and instead preferred to smoke in order to take the edge off my day. I never wanted to smoke on my university campus due to security patrolling the premises 24 hours a day. Weed is very much illegal in my country, and being caught would have likely resulted in my expulsion from my university at the very least. Instead, I used to walk off campus and into a nearby wood. I was always on high alert, especially when I went by myself and alone at night. For context, I am female, and therefore situations like these have the ability to make me feel very uncomfortable very quickly. I realized I was putting myself at high risk, and therefore after sunset, I would never wander too far into the forest. I always made sure I could see the perimeter of the tree line, which was well lit. This meant that if someone was coming towards the woods, I could always see them, but I was far enough into the woods that the darkness would minimize my visibility. One night, I was there, minding my own business, playing on my phone, and enjoying my joint. Then I hear something to the left of me. It's a guy, probably in his 40s, just outside the tree line peering into the woods. I was crouched at the time, another measure I took to minimize my visibility, and honestly shocked to see him, so I immediately flinched. This is the moment where I ducked up. He hears my movement and suddenly reveals a flashlight. He starts moving towards the sound of my movement. This is where fight or flight really kicked in.
I, a 19-year-old female, was not about to win a fight with a man who had a flashlight.
Without another thought, I started hightailing it through these dark woods. I could see the projection of his flashlight against trees very close to me, which just increased my adrenaline. My vision was perfect, and my speed, as well as my ability to avoid tripping over, was pretty impressive considering how high I was at the time. He eventually stopped pursuing me, probably realizing it would be too much effort. I fortunately made it home to my dorm that night. It still unsettles me to contemplate what may have happened had he caught me. I don't know who he was. He wasn't in police uniform or the uniform worn by campus security staff. He was seemingly just a random guy. Maybe he was a disgruntled nearby resident who was sick of students smoking weed in that forest. All I know is that his intentions that night were not good. Creepy hiker. I was walking on a trail in Crater Lake to get back to my car, and as I'm walking, I hear someone running behind me. I look, and it is an older man by himself. I quicken my pace as the sun was setting and it would soon be dark. He stops running and then starts up again, getting closer, and I do the same, trying to keep the distance. It felt creepy, and I was so thankful when I saw another woman with a big dog not too far in front of me. I met up with her, and eventually so did the guy. We all walked together now, and the man was very strange, a bit socially awkward. He had a camera. The woman and I felt the same creepy feeling from him, and I know this from the glances we exchanged with each other. She asked if he came here alone, and he replied that his family was already down the hill waiting for him. I immediately felt the phony lie. And then the really weird thing happened. He took at least 3 pictures of me and the woman. I could have asked him to delete them, but honestly I just wanted to get back to my car because he was making me quite uncomfortable. We finally reached the bottom of the hill, and I noticed there is no family of his in sight. He gets in his car alone and drives off. I felt very lucky there was another woman I was able to walk with for the remainder of the hike. I think this man was some kind of predator. I think someone was following me through the woods in Ireland. Back when I was 14 years old, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Maisie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven, I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off, and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker, or jogger passing us by. On one particular evening, I had gone back to these woods with Maisie, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands. Making our way along the trail, the evening had already started to dim. Wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, I and Maisie stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a good game of hide and seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Maisie wasn't looking, and she would spend the next couple of minutes circling round the hut trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Maisie that day, I'm not sure, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but the way he did so felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I quickly latched my lead back onto Maisie and hurriedly make my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker. Again turning to see if the man was behind me, I could still see him around the curve, only 10 meters away from me now. I did try to tell myself I was just being paranoid, and this man was most likely not following me, but my gut instinct still told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pull out my phone to call my dad to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I made it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black by now, and there was just one single car in the parking area. But it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him passing by, I try to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park. But he doesn't drive away. He just stays there, sitting inside his car with both the engine and headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here, and yet this very same stranger was. Trying to call and text my dad to say I was waiting for him, I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me, and for those whole 20, or however many more, minutes, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing was that my dog Maisie had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Maisie was in general a very nervous dog and basically whined at everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt far longer than 20-some minutes, the strange man, already with his engine and headlights on, reverses from his parking spot, exits out of the car park and onto the main road, leaving me and Maisie in peace. Although we were now alone, basically stranded outside of a dark forest, I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come and get us, 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you want to know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot he had to pick us up. I don't know if that man really was following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he just sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be the following. 1. My dad can sometimes be a careless douche. And 2. Never hike through the forest alone, late in the evening. Abandoned campground. So I grew up in the country. I'm not talking about the middle of nowhere, but it was definitely a step down from the suburbs. For context, next to my house was a massive cornfield, and the houses on the other side and across the street were somewhat close, but I also lived on a 7-acre lot. So it was somewhere between, like, rural country and the suburbs. Anyway, at the back of the property was a pretty big forest that eventually leads into a nature trail, but before that there used to be a campground. This campground used to be a pretty popular place back in the day, long before we moved there, but it eventually closed abruptly. I don't know why exactly, but I've heard a lot of talk about there being issues with drugs. Rumors also circulated that attacks had occurred there. No one that we know in the area who was there at the time really knows for sure. But the fact remains that it closed, and they didn't tear down anything. They just left this abandoned camp, complete with cabins, a mess hall, other buildings, and a swimming pool. That in itself sounds creepy, and it was, but at the time this story takes place I was very young, probably like 7 or 8, and I was also pretty naive given my age. The forest and abandoned camp were not on our property, which ends at the tree line. However, at the time, the owner of that property and my dad were friendly with each other, and this guy said he didn't care if we went back there and even let my dad hunt there during deer season. So one evening when my mom was working nights, my dad took my sister, who is less than a year younger than I am, and me back there to explore. It wasn't dark yet, as it was the summer, but it was getting close by the time we headed back there. We explored a bit, though most of the buildings were locked, and the pool was gross, plus there were a lot of spiders around. I was getting eager to go back, and it was also pretty dusky by the time we explored the cabins. They were all unlocked, and some didn't even have doors, so we were just looking around. In hindsight, this sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, but I didn't know any better at the time, and my dad is basically fearless. While we were in one of the cabins, we heard voices outside it, and we peeked out one of the windows and saw two 20 or 30-something guys. They looked kind of rough and shifty, and they were talking loudly. It seemed like they were in some kind of rush, like they had to hurry and do something back there or like they were looking for something. Now I have rarely seen my dad truly scared, if I ever have, though maybe he's just good at hiding it, and while I wouldn't say he was exactly scared in this situation, I could tell he was uneasy, which was also unusual. He stood in the doorway of the cabin while my sister and I looked out the window. I was holding this loose brick I had picked up, and my dad told me to keep hold of it unless he told me to drop it, which for some reason sticks out to me. While watching through the window, I see one of the guys look toward the cabin and make eye contact with my dad, and they just stared at each other for a little bit. It seemed like forever at the time, but it probably wasn't that long, to be honest, but by this point I was unsettled. It was the brick comment my dad had made, that made me realize that this was a potentially dangerous situation. The guy then whispered something to the other guy, who looked at my dad as well. They just had a kind of silent standoff. Finally the two guys walked away into the trees, and once he couldn't see them anymore, he ushered us out. We headed back down to my house, but my dad seemed uneasy and still kept looking behind us. We made it back with no problems, and nothing ever came of this encounter. My dad, years later, told me that neither of the people that day was the owner, though I suppose they too could have been there with permission. But he had a bad feeling, which I already knew even back then because he had asked us not to tell my mom. Like I said, nothing ever came of it, and maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Even so, it creeped us all out, especially given the tumultuous history of this abandoned camp. My dad never took us into the woods after that, at least not to the campground, though he did still hunt back there. All these years later, and I'm still too uneasy to go back there. This happened about 5 years ago. I lived in an apt at the time and worked at night. When I got home, there were no available parking spots. So as a last resort I parked across the street in, a small business plaza. This plaza has about 3 small businesses inside. After parking I went home and played some games and watched TV shows for a couple of hours. Then I started doing my routine to get ready for sleep. That's when I realized I forgot my inhaler in the car. I have mild asthma. So I walked to my car in that small business plaza around 3 a.m. After grabbing my inhaler, I walked towards the end of the plaza. I noticed an object to my right but did not see what it was because it was too dark. Right at that moment, I heard a sound to my left. Out of nowhere from the bushes, a tall man came out and literally power walked right past me. He walked like he was just 3 feet away from me. And then he went into the bushes to the right. I went home thinking, what the duck was that about? The next morning I go to my car to move it out of the plaza. That's when I realized that small object I saw that I couldn't make out in the dark was the head of a cat. It was placed purposefully because the head was upright. There was no blood, and the body was nowhere in sight. Just seeing that reminded me of that weird dude that popped out from the bushes the previous night. Terrifying sleepover. This takes place about 11 years ago. I was at a sleepover at my best friend's house when I was 13. We stayed up late watching movies and slept on the living room floor in sleeping bags. Her dad was out of town on a business trip, and her mom worked the night shift, so it was just me, her, and her 20-something-year-old sister. At some point in the middle of the night I heard something that woke me up. I realized that it was the front door opening and the footsteps of somebody walking in slowly. I didn't think anything of it because I figured it was just their mom getting home from work a little early, like she did sometimes. I should probably mention the setup of the house because it was a little odd. When you first walk into the front door, there are 3 hallways. The left leads to the parents' room and a bathroom, the one straight ahead leads to the kitchen and living room, and the one to the right leads to my friend's room, her sister's room, and a bathroom. I looked around the edge of the couch down the hall because it was blocking my view. I could only really see a silhouette because it was dark, but it looked like a person wearing a hood. Again, I still wasn't freaked out because they were Muslim, so I thought it was just her mom's hijab. I started to freak out when they pushed the hood off for a minute, and I realized it was a guy in a hoodie and not just her mom. The guy left the door open, turned the corner, and went towards the parents' room. When I couldn't see him anymore, I woke my friend up and, in a kind of panicky whisper, explained what I saw and asked if her dad could be home from the business trip. She said no, and we got quiet when we heard footsteps again. She checked around the corner of the couch this time and whispered back to me that he had walked out the front door and she couldn't see him anymore. We jumped up and booked it to her sister's room. We closed and locked the door behind us and woke up her sister, who was kind of pissed and thought we were just being annoying. We explained what was going on, and about that time we heard the footsteps again. The guy was walking back into the parents' room and, after a few minutes, back out the front door. Her sister told us to go hide in the closet, and she called the police. While we waited for them to get there, we could hear this guy walking into the house, walking around for a few moments, and then just leaving again. He didn't seem to be in a hurry of any kind, and we were just hoping that he didn't come to our door. Pretty soon we heard sirens, and the guy must have too because he took off. The police caught him and arrested him. He had been grabbing anything of value, putting it in his truck, and coming back for more. I found out later that he was a janitor and worked at the place my friend's mom worked at. He had heard that her husband was going to be out of town and knew that she worked the night shift, so he waited until his night off while the husband was gone and she was at work to rob the house. From what I understand, he didn't know that they had 2 daughters. He thought the house would be empty all night, so he took his time. Not long after that happened, they got 2 big dogs. I still slept over at their house sometimes, but I was always a little on edge. I'm still not sure how he even got their address, but I'm just glad he never came back. Creeper in the woods. The summer before, in 2nd grade, my family and I moved to Olympia, Washington. I lived with my parents and my older sister back then. My sister is 2 years older than me, so she would have been in 4th grade. My sister celebrated her 10th birthday that same year by having a handful of friends over for a sleepover. We owned a trampoline back then, and we often had sleepovers on it during the summer months. We have many fond memories of sleeping under the stars on that trampoline, but this, however, was not one of those fond memories. Seeing as this was my sister's party, I, being the younger, annoying brother, was not invited to the trampoline party that evening. I do, however, remember the events that unfolded. It all began when all the 6 or so girls came fleeing inside screaming about a man in the woods. Our backyard at this house was fenced on the left and right sides but was not fenced on the back side, as our backyard continued into a beautiful forest backdrop. According to the girls, as they were out on the trampoline enjoying their sleepover, a man in a yellow rain jacket appeared in the woods. The random, creepy man stood in the woods and stared at them the entire time they were outside. He did not respond to them when they attempted to address him, nor did he break eye contact with the girls. It was at this point the girls were so scared they collectively ran as fast as they could inside. After the girls relayed their experience to my parents and me, the 3 of us raced to the window to see this man. When we got to the window, all we saw was a glimpse of the yellow jacket as he disappeared further into the forest out of our sight, beyond the border of the neighboring fence. I recall my dad going outside and yelling at the strange man with threats of calling the police, but at this point we could no longer see him. My parents did call the police and filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. After this experience, our parents thought twice about letting us sleep on the trampoline at night while we lived at that house. We moved 1 year later. Creepy man watching. My girlfriend, 2 kids, 4 and 3, and I were tent camping in eastern Washington one summer at a campground. It was a nice campground, but there were not many guests at all since it was before peak season. We had a site with no other campers visible to us. One night at approximately 1 a.m., my now ex-girlfriend and I were sitting by the fire while our kids were sleeping in the big tent that we all were sharing. A beat-up old Ford Explorer slowly drove by our campground and proceeded to keep driving around the campground out of sight. I thought it was odd, but maybe it was just someone looking for friends or a campsite. We went to bed, and I woke up early the next morning, maybe at 5 a.m., to go to the bathroom, and there was the same beat-up Ford Explorer at the campsite adjacent to ours, maybe 60 feet away. And mind you, there were dozens of other open campsites around, so my alarms were certainly raised by this. After going to the bathroom and returning to our tent, my kids and girlfriend were still asleep. I saw a man standing behind the Ford Explorer with only his head visible, trying to hide himself, looking directly at my tent. I stood there and stared right back at him for about 45 seconds and raised my hands up in the air like, "What the duck are you looking at?" I didn't want to cause a commotion and wake the kids up, and he just continued to stare. I sat in one of my camp chairs and kept my eyes on him and watched him get into his car, which was facing us, but I couldn't see what he was doing in there. About an hour later he started his car up and slowly drove right by our site and stared directly at me, maintaining eye contact the entire pass. About 25 feet away. I know for a fact this guy had ill intentions just by his demeanor and looks. Likely would have done something had I not been there. My one creepy camping story. I used to do lots of camping trips with a friend of mine post-college. Most of our trips were in Montana, since that's where we both lived at the time, and that's where this story takes place. My friend, Jude, and I used to spontaneously leave on camping road trips where we just pick a direction and drive until we found some cool place to hike and camp. Sometimes, we'd look up trails and add 1 to 2 day backpacking adventures to these trips, but, more often than not, we would end up in an empty campground or some pull-off on a Forest Service road and set up our tent right outside the car for the night. Looking back, it was wildly irresponsible because we never told anyone where we were going. We almost never had a plan, so if we had gone missing, there would have been no clue as to where to start looking. We almost never had cell service where we camped. So, the creepy camping story I have happened in 2020, which was the height of Jude's and my spontaneous camping phase. I had taken a week off of work, and we wanted to go up to Glacier and hike and camp for several days, which we did. Since it was COVID, camping inside the park was not allowed, so we had to find random spots to camp every night. We stayed at one campground about 180 miles away from West Glacier on the way up, then found a different spot each night closer to the park. All of our campsites near the park were between 10 and 25 miles away from each other because it was difficult to locate spots that were both legal to camp in and hadn't already been taken up by other park goers. This meant that we sometimes spent hours driving up random Forest Service roads looking for somewhere secluded to sleep. But, we always managed to find something. Here's where it gets creepy. The first night of our trip, we stayed at a campground near Drummond, which was about 180 miles from West Glacier. Early in the morning, when it had just started to get light, I heard something walking around the tent. This campground was occupied by a few other campers, so at first I thought that maybe one of them was looking for the bathroom. The steps were heavy and deliberate, like whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. It was in the grass, though, so I couldn't hear individual footfalls. It was more like the sifting through and crushing of grass and twigs. Whatever it was walked within a few feet of our tent, coming from the side facing the woods, not the other campsites or the road. I was only half awake, and I remember thinking two things. 1, I'm glad I made sure Jude locked the car, and 2, I really hope it's just a very bold deer and not a human. I was super tired and didn't want to think it was anything creepy, so I did my best to fall back asleep, and eventually the sound stopped, though I don't remember them ever moving away. They just weren't there anymore. Jude had prescribed sleeping pills and was a deep sleeper, so I assumed he'd slept through the whole thing. When we both finally got up for the day, I didn't think anything of it and didn't mention it to him. The second night, we were up by West Glacier after a day of hiking and found a spot not too far from the park entrance. It wasn't a designated campground but was within a series of dirt roads in a wooded area. We'd seen other people pulled off and camping out of their cars, just like we were. Our tent was set up right next to the car since there wasn't a lot of open space in the pull-off we'd found. Again, in the early hours of the morning, just when it was getting light, I woke up and heard someone walking around our tent. This time, the grass wasn't as tall, and I distinctly heard the heavy footsteps of a person walking right next to our tent, then around the car. Again, I remember being glad that Jude had locked the car the night before. The footsteps had come from the woods, not the road, and continued moving about around our tent for a while. Then, they eventually stopped without moving away. I, again, went back to sleep, then woke up for the day a couple hours later with Jude and didn't think anything more of it. I assumed it was someone hiking in the area who cut through our campsite as a shortcut. I didn't mention it to Jude. The third night, it took us a long time to find a campsite. It was pouring rain, and we were both exhausted from a 13-mile hike. It took us 3 hours to find a place, and we finally settled on a pullout off of a dirt road above the Hungry Horse Dam. We were both uneasy about this spot because it wasn't off a Forest Service road, and we were a little worried we'd be bothered by traffic on the road or cops telling us not to camp there. It was remote, but not remote enough, if you know what I mean. The pull-off was a kind of little road that went to nowhere, probably used to push snow onto when plowing during the winter. It went about 50 yards into the woods, then ended with a dirt mound. There was an old fire pit and broken glass at the end of it, so we set up our tent near the entrance. It was still pouring rain, and Jude walked around in the mud in his bare feet, while I kept my shoes on and examined the fire pit and broken bottles. Then, we turned in for the night. I noticed too late that Jude had not locked the car, but he was asleep with the keys in his pocket, and I was too tired to get out and do it manually. Plus, it was still raining, and I didn't want to get wet. In the morning, just when it was starting to get light, I woke up and heard something walking around in the woods above our tent. I thought it was a deer at first because the steps weren't as loud as the ones I'd heard the previous morning. Then, whatever it was came down onto the pullout where our tent was and began moving around our car. The tent was set up only about 3 feet away from the car, so I could hear whatever it was very distinctly as it walked. The ground was muddy, so the footfalls were more muffled. Then, I heard the car door open. I remember I'd been only half awake up until that point. I became fully alert then but was still a little unsure of what I'd actually heard, so I didn't immediately get up. However, I kept listening. Whatever it was kept walking around near the car. There was no sound of another vehicle nearby, so whatever it was had to have walked here. As I listened, I heard the car door shut. I sat fully up at that point, waking Jude up, and said, "I'm going to go check that out." I honestly cannot believe my nerve in that moment, but being scared, numb and sleep deprived tends to make me stupidly brave. I immediately put on my shoes and opened the tent. By this time, the sounds had stopped completely. Remember, the tent was right next to the car, on the same side as the woods. I would have heard someone walking away. I got out, and the first thing I noticed was that nobody was around or inside the car. It was Jude's car, and he's a bit of a mess, so no one would be able to fit in there if they weren't in the front seats anyway. The second thing I noticed was that the ground was muddy all around the car and tent, and the only footprints in the mud were from my trail runners and Jude's bare feet. I even followed his barefoot trail around to make sure that every print was his. There were no footprints coming to or from the woods. Nothing. I inspected the car and didn't find anything out of place. No signs of disturbance. I walked over to the fire pit and again could only find my prints. Then, I did the stupid thing and went past that fire pit into the woods. There, I found a weird makeshift shelter made of pallets that had some blankets and women's undergarments in it. It scared the hell out of me initially because I was pretty spooked by this point, and I thought there was a body in there. But, upon closer inspection, the whole thing was rained out and undisturbed. Nobody had spent the night there in a long while. Even still, I didn't touch anything and only came within a few feet of the thing before turning around. I returned to the car and sat inside it while I waited for Jude to finish waking up. Then, we packed up our tent and didn't mention it to each other at all that day. On the fourth night, we found a really cool spot below a dirt road on the west side of the park. We got briefly disturbed by a man walking into our campsite, but he just seemed like he was scouting out a place to camp with his family and didn't know we were there. That evening was otherwise uneventful, and we both went to sleep early because Jude wanted to catch the sunrise. I was afraid to miss my alarm, so I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately heard something moving around outside our tent. This time, it was right behind our tent, in the direction of the way we'd come / where we'd left the car. I remember being kind of annoyed that this thing had started up so late when all I wanted to do was sleep. Eventually, the sound stopped, and I did fall asleep. In the early hours of the morning, we got up and broke camp before it got light. My alarm was loud and woke Jude up too. I forgot about the sounds I'd heard in the night, helped pack up the tent, and didn't mention it to him. I was pretty happy when we were finally inside the locked car and were headed to our next destination, though, but I have always been a tad scared of the dark. We saw a spectacular sunrise that morning. Afterwards, when we were on our way to get breakfast and coffee before heading home, Jude looked over at me and said, "Have you been hearing something outside our tent every morning?" I looked at him in shock and said, "Yes. Remember, I got up to investigate it yesterday?" And Jude said, "Yeah, that's really weird. Every morning, I've been hearing it too." And we both talked about how strange it was that we'd both heard it, but neither had thought it important to mention afterwards. It was like, even though it was really unsettling, something subconscious had made us both think that it was nothing to dwell on. To this day, I get shivers when I think about hearing whatever that was, and I'm still astounded by the fact that I actually got up one of those mornings to investigate it. But, in those moments, even though I remember acknowledging that it was creepy, I don't remember actually feeling very afraid. And, clearly, I wasn't too worried, because I hadn't once thought to bring it up to Jude. So, anyway, that's my one creepy camping story. I would like to add that this was not the first time, nor the last, that I've heard something moving around the tent during a camping trip. However, this trip was the first time it was so consistent, and it's the only time I've ever gone out to see what it was because of how persistent it was. I've had nights where black bears, elk, and deer have come through camp. I've never had the circumstances or the sudden ceasing of the sounds be so creepy. The fact that we never camped in the same place twice but still kept hearing something really weirded me out too. To this day, Jude is super unworried and nonchalant about it, whereas I almost find it more unnerving each time I retell that story. What do you all think it was? Just a series of unsettling coincidences? Or something else? Man in the bushes. So when I was young, about 11 maybe, I was a recluse. I didn't go out very often, but this fateful day I decided to go on my scooter down the road to the park. So I arrived at the park, and there's a path that runs down a hill into the park. Behind the path are some tall bushes and trees that back onto a private garden. I know that because my friend knew the old lady who lived there. So as I'm going back up the hill to come back down again, I get to the top, and I notice a man on the left walking towards me. Keep in mind that it's a public path, so it's all cool. I go down the hill on my scooter and come back up again, then I look left, no man, and I look right, no man. I think that's a little odd, as there are no turns on the path, it's just a straight path. I get a bit weirded out but go back down the hill again on my scooter, and I somehow fall over onto my back. I get up and very suddenly feel I'm being watched. I look around the bushes, and somehow I notice a face. The man that was walking down the path was in the bush, crouched, staring at me. I try to make it look like I'm just done playing, and I start walking up the hill with my scooter, and he starts following me. Keep in mind that my house is literally about 5 minutes away, but I didn't want to show him where I lived. I start running, he starts jogging behind me, about 30 seconds behind, and that's when I see a neighbor driving toward me. I jump in front of the car, they screech to a halt and jump out and sit me up, and I explain, and he looks up and down, but the guy was never found. I realize he didn't actually do anything wrong, per se, but it creeped me the duck out then, and it still does now. They waited for me in the dark. When I was 18, female, I was living with a host family in rural Ecuador. I was there for a gap year, learning the language and doing an internship as part of a program. This was 2013. Every Wednesday, I had Spanish class in the nearby city, and I always came back home before dark. To get home, I would take a bus out of the city for about an hour, and then I would have two choices. 1. Stop at the tiny town, think one road town, and pay a local informal taxi to drive me the last 2 miles or 2. Get off a little later and walk a mile home past my workplace, an animal shelter. One Wednesday, about 4 months into my time in Ecuador, I was feeling more relaxed and left the city at dusk. I thought about option 1, of taking the taxi, but I knew from the past that these taxi drivers were often drunk, getting in fights, and had a bad reputation with women. I considered walking that first route, but I knew there were aggressive dogs that way, and I felt like I could be a target for a drunk or anyone really along that road. So I stayed on the bus for option 2. The problem with option 2 was that the walk home was unlit on a mostly uninhabited dirt road that no one used, especially at night, which also passed a large empty park. I felt between a rock and a hard place. When I got off the bus and started down the dirt road, I noticed a man walking close behind me. I sped up a bit, and he matched my pace. I slowed, and he did the same. I was hoping I was just being paranoid, so I decided to stop to check something in my pocket to let him pass so that I could walk behind. When I did that, he came level with me and stopped to face me, and I knew it was bad. He greeted me, and I started walking again without answering, and he walked with me. I was thinking hard then. I am a planner in many parts of my life, and I had previously thought that if I ever came back late, I would take Route 2, and if I had issues, I could stop at the animal shelter, the only building along the way, where there was a 24-hour guard, because we had desirable exotic animals there too. I knew the guards from the daytime, and I thought if they weren't taking an on-duty nap, I would get help. So as this guy is walking with me, I know we are about a quarter mile/third of a kilometer from the entrance to the shelter. The guy started asking questions like how old I was, if I lived alone, and if anyone was expecting me that night. All obviously creepy questions and no questions like my name, where I was from, I am a tall blonde girl who is obviously not from Ecuador, or how I spoke Spanish. This was all in Spanish even though it is obviously not my first language. I was exaggerating about all the people waiting for me at home and trying to seem calm and friendly to try to get to the shelter entrance without him realizing that I was nervous. When we got to the entrance, I stopped and told him that I wanted to see a friend and to continue on. He told me he would wait for me, and I told him to go on. He continued walking but almost immediately left the road and veered into the dark park. I could see him silhouetted against the starry sky at the top of a slight hill in the park, just standing. I could feel he was watching. Meanwhile, I started knocking on the gate like we do at work to let the guard know that someone known was there. I was hoping beyond hope that he wasn't sleeping. Luckily, the guard was awake and came to the gate. He immediately let me in and knew someone was wrong. I told him what had happened, and he was clearly freaked out but didn't want me to see that so much. He asked if I wanted to wait or walk, and I said walk, because I wanted to go home, and he said he would walk home with me the remaining half mile. By that point, the man was gone from the hill and disappeared in the dark. The guard I was with had a flashlight, a police-type baton, and some other things and looked tough. We start walking, and the guard is using the flashlight. We turn a corner, and the light beam hits a red pickup truck parked by the road. All of a sudden, a man jumps from a bush by the truck into the back, the truck starts, and it drives away super fast. The guard and I were shocked. Of course we assumed it was the same guy and that this was a setup. The guard walked me home, and I called my program mentor that night. At the time I was fully shaken, and I knew I would never return after dark again. But looking back with a bit more wisdom, I realized that that was a really close call. The next day, the guard told all my coworkers what happened, and they were super protective of me from then on. I strongly believe that they understood far better than me the danger I had been in / was potentially still in and shielded me a bit. Later that week, we heard that 2 girls had been attacked in the park. I loved Ecuador, and I went on to live and work multiple years there. Still one of the closest life or death experiences I have had. Creepy camping experience. Hi everyone. I have been camping for years across the US. I am curious to know if anyone has had a similar experience or advice for something that happened last weekend. Basically, I was camping in a state park, a full state park, families and other campers all around, by myself, as a female. I woke up at 3:30 a.m. Saturday night/Sunday morning to find the lone male camping next door to me walking next to my tent and staring down at me. I freaked out and left. No matter how long I try to steelman his behavior, I just can't come up with a reason why he would be on my campsite at all, at 3:30 a.m. no less. Our sites are large, and it would not be incidental that he'd traversed from his site to mine. Be where he was standing, which is directly next to my tent and the least reasonable place to be standing, just a sliver of space between the tent and picnic bench, but the closest space to my head. If he was genuinely just trying to walk across my site, looking down into my tent, watching me as I was sleeping, I left the campsite immediately, in the middle of the night, and notified the park. Any thoughts or advice? Thanks. It was an unholy and true incident. So, well, it happened a few weeks ago. One day on our school campus while school was on, my mother and the teachers in the kindergarten saw something horrific. The campus consists of an apartment where we live, a ground, a separate college, a school of ours, and the kindergarten block in front of our school. As my mother was doing her work in the AV room, my friends were playing outside on the ground, and my class was having IT practicals. A very strange person of unknown gender walked into our school. They had a very thick cloth on their head. A very thick one, with no chances to even see out of it, yet they walked in a perfect straight line all the way to our campus. My mother was the first one to see them. She was scared and horrified. A very strange feeling came over her. If you see a stranger and get scared, you'll only be afraid. But she felt something else too. Something weird. Something she couldn't explain. The feeling was so intense that she wanted to lock herself in the room and hide. But she couldn't. Being a coordinator with everyone relying on her, she couldn't. Rushing out, she told the cleaner to lock the block's gate. Listening to my mother's words, she did. And they went away from the kindergarten. The PT teachers chased her out. The security was useless. A day passed, and we went to sleep like usual. School was over, it was night, we brought our dog in, the cat was on the bed sleeping, and it was nice. Sleep came steady. Until my dog started barking. His sound was never like before. It was strange. Aggressive. As if he had seen something nobody is supposed to. We woke up but were very sleepy. My mother went and made him stop, and then I stood at the doorway to stop him from barking when he started again. Then, something happened. I had a very strange feeling. I was afraid. So was my mother. But being a parent with a child, she has to be brave. She went to him and comforted my dog. But then, she could hear sounds from outside. Drawing back the curtain, she peered out and saw nothing. She was confused. Something was wrong. My dog never barked like that. He was 5 months old anyway. No puppy would bark that harsh, that. Weirdly. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Opening the door, she came to know that the members of our building were awake, and there was an unwanted guest. The day the unknown person, who had previously come to our school dressed in all white, returned after the PT teachers had chased them out during school hours was quite eventful. And before they could enter, the drivers chased them away all the way to a pond, where they naturally collapsed. It was said that they sat under the tree that was near the pond for 2 days. Why? We never knew. And we never will. There are some things that go unanswered. And maybe it should be unanswered. The drivers used a long stick to unravel the clothes to see their face. It was a lady. A very dark lady. Back to the night, she had come. She had gone to one of our teachers' houses and banged on their window. Each time it got louder. Louder and louder until it shifted to the door and stopped. She held the rails and was swaying back and forth, singing a very strange tune. Then she hung her body, almost falling, and said something before she moved. We suppose, since my dog never cared about anyone else, once 2 strange men banged on our principal's house, and my dog didn't bark nor wake, she must have come to our floor. And hearing her, and feeling that same strange feeling. Something that isn't supposed to be there, she must have knocked. And he must have heard and felt it to start barking. Perhaps, it was because of him that she didn't do anything and left. Now my mother came into the house telling me that someone was there. I became useless, searching for my glasses that seemed to have disappeared. So she took my dog and left. I found my glasses shortly after. They were under the blanket, where they were not supposed to be. I went down. The old ladies and the teacher's wife were out with her baby. My friend came out, but since we had a fight in school, she just went back in and slept. I became alert like never before. My senses were sharp as I strained to listen to my mother's and the others' voices. Some college teachers, along with our school teachers, our principal and her son, and my mother and dog, all set out, and I had my eyes fixed onto their faraway shadows. I listened. One time they were near, the other time, they weren't. I had my eyes on the road too. I had imagined what I should do if the strange lady comes back. Should I first toss the older lady into the house and then hide? Suddenly, a shrill moan cut through the lady's chattering voices. I froze. What happened? Then it came again. And again before it stopped. I waited. But there was no more. Then, everyone came back, they were smiling. I rushed to greet my dog. He was a hero that day. Apparently, the lady was mentally unstable and could speak in a flawless manner. Earlier that day, at 6 p.m., my dog, my mother, and I went out to throw away the trash, and we actually saw her sitting under a tree, staring at our school. Our gates closed before 6. Could it mean? She has come in before 6 and hid somewhere we couldn't see. The lady cursed at my mother and the others as they all interrogated her. She only said that she was from a faraway place, where we once lived. Then, my mother was the first one. With a sling of the stick she held, came a sharp smack on the lady's leg, which, as I earlier said, was followed by a sudden moan and scream. Then the others followed, and they chased her away. My dog was running after her, and he dragged my mother along as he grabbed onto his leash. But if you would think that it ended here, that we got peace, and that she'd never come back, you would be wrong. She was back the next morning. This happened literally yesterday, and I honestly don't think I've fully processed it yet. I, female, 19, and my friend, she's also 19, were biking home at around 3 a.m. on a dimly lit street right next to our house. On one side was forest, pitch black beyond the tree line, and on the other side were a bunch of houses. From far away, we spotted a red car with one broken headlight parked ahead. As soon as we got closer, the car started moving, past us very slowly, then made a U-turn and drove past us again. Even in the dark, it was obvious we were two girls alone at night, so we put some space between us and them. As soon as we got to the sidewalk, we noticed a girl standing partially hidden behind a white truck, watching that same red car. The car was creeping towards her. Then, she ran off, running up the sidewalk and turning into a bike path that cuts through the forest. Immediately, two men got out of the car and followed her in. So we decided to follow and try to help that girl. Survival instincts hadn't kicked in yet. I live next to that forest. I know how dark it gets. No one walks that path without a flashlight unless they have a reason, and even then it was 3 a.m. The slow footsteps, the bucket hat guy, and the way the car disappeared, it all just felt wrong. We reached the path entrance and saw the red car just waiting there. The driver, a guy in a white bucket hat, looked straight at us, then sped away far into the street. The path was pitch black. We walked in, fence on one side, dense forest on the other. That's when I noticed it, slow, deliberate footsteps, keeping pace with us, definitely not an animal, and heavy enough to be a person. We kept walking on until my friend spotted the girl ahead of us. She shined her flashlight and called out, "Hey! Are you okay?" The girl looked over her shoulder, stared for a moment with this unreadable, creepy expression, and then took off running deeper into the darkness. At that point, our survival instincts finally kicked in. We turned and sprinted back the way we came, screaming as we ran. We called the police as soon as we got back to the street. Within minutes, 3 police cars arrived. They asked questions, and one ghost car drove down the forest path. About 5 minutes later, they returned and showed us a photo of the girl. The cops said they found her with one man, which made no sense, because less than 10 minutes earlier we'd seen her completely alone and running away. They also said neither of them would identify themselves or explain why they were there. They brushed us off, saying we could go home now. As we walked away, we saw 3 people get into a police car. Which made it even weirder, because earlier they said there was only one guy with her. So was there really someone following us in the woods? I keep thinking, what if this was bait? Maybe the only reason they didn't go after us was because we started screaming. Either way, I can't stop replaying it in my head. I found a creepy forest hideout. I work for a company that does contract work exclusively for the U.S. Forest Service in surveying areas for invasive plants, and we basically travel all over the forest in SoCal, even in areas that were off limits to the public. So my crew at work is basically between 5 and 6 people every day, the same people, for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Like I said before, we swept through the forest area by area, combing for invasive plants to track on GPS and remove. I remember one day when I first started working that my crew and I came across an abandoned day-use area where it was clear that some suspicious activities had taken place. We used to park the car in a turnout across from it and eat lunch, and several cars would drive into the area, over the curb, because the main driveway was blocked with a big metal gate. Some people got out of their cars to walk their dogs, take pictures, have picnics, or carry things into the area. For a while, we had kind of skipped over the area because, according to my boss, no invasive plants had ever been tracked in the day-use area, so we never really went in there. However, the area remained untrustworthy, as we frequently drove by and observed individuals disposing of their belongings. What ended up happening was the crew got called to another part of the forest for a while, and we were probably out of that area for around a few months, only coming back sporadically. But we drove down that same road every day and still saw cars parked there and stuff being dumped. One day, my boss informed us that we needed to walk the nearly 7-mile stretch of road that includes the day-use area. He asked for volunteers to cover the sides of the road, which cuts through a narrow canyon probably only 500 feet wide. The day-use area was on the right side of the road, so I volunteered to go right with 2 other co-workers with plans on checking the area out extensively. We took our tools with us, which consisted of hoes, some folding saws, and pulaskis, basically a 2-headed axe with a pick on the other end. Additionally, I was wearing my cookery knife on my belt. So we start walking into the day-use area, and I'm scanning all of the sites. There's a bunch of abandoned stuff lying everywhere, like refrigerators, some storage shelves, and broken glass. There were also several holes in the ground that were perfect squares cut into the concrete, and they went down pretty far. They weren't that big, probably about 4 by 4. So we keep walking back, and I see these rags scattered on the ground that had some red stains on them. They were next to a big pile of dirt that was covered with stones, and half a skateboard was sticking out at the top of the pile. There was a wooden cross nearby, and I'm thinking, is this a grave? So I called the other 2 guys over, and we read the writing on the skateboard, and it was the burial site for something that was once called Diamond. I couldn't make out the years inscribed on the grave, but it was large, measuring about 3 or 4 feet long. The grave was approximately 3 or 4 feet long. One of my coworkers thought it was an animal grave, but that didn't explain the rags nearby. I chalked it up to a pet grave for someone who walked their dog in that area and moved on. We keep pushing through, and I'm seeing tons of invasive plants everywhere. I'm reading off the names to my coworker, who is putting them into the GPS unit when we see a building tucked into a corner of the day-use area. So we walk back there, and we find a tiny opening between the rocks that is barely noticeable from the road, which turns out to lead to an entirely different canyon. We check the map, and sure enough, there is a canyon where all of these invasive plants could be coming from. After noting this in GPS, we go to check out the building. It's about the size of half of a shipping container and is clearly abandoned. The door was slightly opened, so I reached out with the hoe and pried the door open. Pitch black. My coworker took out his phone, shone the light inside, and we saw some strange items. There were things scattered all over the floor. The floor was littered with pillows, blankets, and kids' clothing. I suspected that a family might be living here or something else entirely. I backed up and walked back to the road, but my coworkers were teasing me about it. I wasn't going to see what else was in there. When I see the road again, a truck that isn't ours is in the day-use area. I don't see anyone using the picnic areas, and the weird thing is, the truck had driven over the curb to bypass the gate and was parked in a secluded area. I waited for my coworkers in the clearing since no one was in or around the truck. When they finally got to my spot, I pointed out the truck to them, and they said he was probably hanging out in the old bathroom building, which was just off the road. They expressed a desire to explore the building, and I was determined not to abandon them, so I accompanied them. The building was kind of V-shaped with male and female bathrooms on the end and a storage room in the middle. They went into the men's room, whose door had literally been kicked down by someone, and apparently there was a ton of adult stuff and kids' clothes in there too, with pillows and blankets. There was a small hole that had been cut into the wall leading to the small storage room. It sounded like they were going to crawl in from the bathroom to check it out. At this point I was standing outside the building on the other end of the door to the storage room. I kid you not, I hear the doorknob jiggle. At that moment, my coworkers came running out of the men's bathroom, and one of them grabbed his Pulaski, brought it up, and bashed the hell out of the door handle and the area around the door to the storage room. 10 to 15 seconds later, we saw a man sprint out of the bathroom and run deeper into the day-use area, specifically into the first building we had explored. Apparently, this is what happened. One of my coworkers stuck his head through the cutout hole in the men's bathroom, looking into the storage area. It was pitch black, so he used his phone flashlight and lit the area up. he noticed a man sitting alone in the dark corner of the storage area. There were boxes lined up on the shelves and pillows and blankets all over the floor. It startled him so much that he ran out, and the guy who was in there ran out as well. We ended up radioing some hotshot firefighters from a nearby station for support, and they sent a few personnel who used a chainsaw to cut through the door and set up a floodlight, revealing that the entire room was filled with boxes of adult magazines and children's clothing. We told them where the man was in the other building, so they checked it out, opened the door, and turned on the floodlights. The creepiest part was that the building went deeper into the adjacent hills. The firefighters checked their topography maps, and sure enough, there was a bunker. And nobody is going that far into that place. Followed in the dark. I work full-time in healthcare, which is a high-stress job, and it can be quite overwhelming and physically and mentally draining. So on my days off, to de-stress and relax, I love to go on drives by the ocean by myself or with my best friend. Most of the time we would go late at night to watch the stars, or the moon, or simply just to listen to the ocean. It would reset our brains and relieve stress, and the long chats and laughs we would have were so memorable and special. But then something happened a couple of days ago, and it's made me rethink doing these beloved night drives. It was a cold, dark November night. Usually I get off work at 11, but tonight I was leaving work at around 1 a.m. The perks of working in healthcare. I worked in a tiny little town about an hour west of the big city. I lived about 45 minutes away and was dreading the drive home. It was very windy out that night, and as I left work, the brown leaves swirled around me in the parking lot. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me as I slid into the front seat of my car. When my coworker had come in to relieve me, she had advised me to take the old highway home, not my usual route of the new highway. "It's so windy, my car almost blew off the highway," she had said. The old highway ran almost parallel to the new highway, except it snaked through thick forests and wound along the coastline. Normally it would take me 45 minutes to get home, but taking the old highway would take me at least an hour. But I wasn't worried about time, I was just worried about making it home safe. As I drove, my headlights illuminated the thick trees lining the road. The wind would make my car sway every now and then, making me grip the wheel tighter. All I could think about was the warmth of my bed, and I sighed, turning on my Bluetooth to listen to one of my podcasts. There was no one else on the road, and a car hadn't gone by in over 20 minutes. There were no street lamps on the old highway, and it was always very dark, with thick forest on either side, little beaches, and a house every now and then. About 10 minutes later, I passed through a tiny little town, if you could even call it a town. It had a grocery store, a drugstore, a couple of restaurants, and an old gas station. It was a tiny little trailer with a couple of pumps that sold cheap cigarettes, closing around 8 p.m. As I drove by the gas station, I noticed the first vehicle I had seen in a while. An old truck was idling in the gravel parking lot by the gas station. This wasn't unusual, as it was a fishing town, and it was starting to become lobster season, but as I drove by, I could see the outline of someone sitting in the truck. It gave me a weird sense of comfort to know I wasn't the only one awake and on the roads at this time. I kept on driving, but I could feel myself growing very tired. About 10 minutes ahead, there was a little beach that I loved, so I decided to pull over and stop for a few minutes to have a quick smoke. The cold air and the sound of the waves would probably do a better job of waking me up than my podcast would. Plus it was stormy out, so the waves would be huge, and I loved watching the ocean's magnificent waves pummel the coastline during a storm. I pulled into the gravel parking lot by the beach and parked at the very end. There was no one else there, and as I parked, I put down my window and lit my smoke. I stepped out of the car for a few moments to try and get a glimpse of the waves, but the wind was so strong it almost took my breath away. The cold air was harsh as it hit my face, but it did its job by waking me up. But that was enough for me. I shivered and got back into the car, turning the heat on high. I breathed in the cold salty air and finally felt myself relax. It had been a rough shift, and I was grateful to have a few days off after tonight. About halfway through my smoke, headlights swept across my car as another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. It parked about 100 yards away from me and idled for a few minutes before turning off. I was plunged into darkness again, with no sound except for the crashing waves and the wind. All of a sudden I started to get an uneasy feeling in my stomach and was unsure why. It was not uncommon for another vehicle to be here at this hour, as a lot of people would come to the beach late at night, myself included. Some would walk along the beach in the moonlight, or smoke a joint around a little fire, or young couples would come and mess around in their cars. But still, I felt uneasy. I glanced at the time. It was 1:40 a.m. Shivering to myself, I lit up another smoke and leaned back in my seat, trying to ignore the growing heaviness in my stomach. But I was enjoying the sound of the waves and was reluctant to leave just yet. I'll leave after I finish this smoke, I said to myself. Usually the beach was lit up by the moonlight, but tonight it was so dark. The only sounds were of the waves hitting the beach and the wind whistling through my car. After a few moments I thought I heard the sound of gravel crunching but looked around and didn't see anything. I shrugged and rubbed my eyes, suddenly feeling tired again. I was almost done with my smoke, so I put my foot on the brakes to start my car. The red light of my brakes illuminated something through my rearview mirror for just a split second. Or at least I thought I had seen something, but when I looked back again, there was nothing there. I shook my head and tossed my smoke out of the car, laughing to myself. It's all these true crime podcasts I've been listening to. They're getting to me, I thought to myself as I put the car in reverse. I glanced at my side mirror before reversing, and my heart almost dropped into my stomach. There, illuminated by the red light, was a figure crouched down, leaning against the side of my car, near the brake light. He seemed to be slowly inching closer to the driver's door. A jolt of fear ran through me, and I froze for a second. Then fight or flight kicked in, and my body chose flight. I slammed my foot on the gas, and my car reversed quickly. The figure jumped out of the way, and as I switched the gear to drive, my headlights illuminated a man, in a dark sweater and jeans, running towards the other vehicle. It was the truck I had seen earlier by the gas station. My heart sank, and I felt sick to my stomach as I floored it out of the parking lot and back on the road. I was terrified. I was about 20 minutes from home, and the old highway was basically one long winding road with very few side streets and not many options to hide in case he followed me. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, praying I wouldn't see headlights behind me. But after a few moments, there they were. My stomach dropped again, and I increased my speed. There had to be a road up ahead I could quickly turn into and hide. Luck must have been on my side because as I turned a sharp bend, the headlights disappeared from my rearview momentarily, and I could see there was a little gravel road quickly coming up on the left. I yanked the steering wheel left, barely braking, and turned, gunning it up the little road. The road was so narrow it would only fit one car, and I was relieved to see the road had many turns, which would hide me from the main road. After getting a few hundred yards down the road, I quickly shut off my lights and rolled to a park. I sat there, shaking, in total darkness, praying I wouldn't see the headlights come up the road behind me. It was silent, except for my harsh breathing. My heart was pounding. I rolled down my window and listened. It was quiet, and all I could hear was the wind blowing through the trees. I couldn't stop shaking. I wasn't a religious person, but I sat there praying. Praying I wouldn't see those headlights, praying to just make it home safely to my warm bed, praying for this all to be just a nightmare. With nothing but darkness and forest surrounding me, I waited. 10 minutes went by, then 20. Nothing. The tension in my body eased, and the sinking feeling in my stomach started to fade. I gave myself another 10 minutes, took some deep breaths, and then turned on my car, keeping my lights low. I had to do almost a 10-point turn to get myself turned back around on the narrow road, but I somehow managed to and slowly drove down the little road back to the main road. As I came to the main road, I hesitated. I could see a few kilometers in each direction as the road snaked around the coastline, and I didn't see any vehicles on the road. I took a deep breath and turned left, towards home. The whole drive back, I was tense, but I did not see that old truck again. Only 2 cars passed me, with one being a police officer and the other being a Jeep, but I made it safely home. As I pulled into my driveway and turned off my car, I made the promise to myself to never go to that beach at night again. Some people just have bad intentions, and unfortunately I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. In my early 20s I was at a gas station pumping gas into my car when a man in a raised dirty truck pulled up across from me. He seemed really agitated and angry. He started putting gas in his truck too. Then he looked over at me and said, "Get over here. I need to talk to you." I looked around, and there was no one else with us. I told him I was not coming over there, and I didn't know him and didn't need to talk to him. He then demanded that I get over there right now because he thinks the pump is charging him wrong, so I need to come over and look. I told him I didn't work at the gas station and that if he needed help, he should go ask someone who worked there. I was getting the worst vibes from him and was terrified. His veins were bulging from his neck, he kept looking around, and he seemed like he was either on drugs or mentally ill. I was already trying to stop pumping gas even though my car wasn't full because I wanted to lock myself in my car and leave. At this point, he became enraged and started screaming at me to get over there and stand next to his truck immediately. He started quickly walking towards me while repeatedly screaming, "Get over here next to my truck. Come here." He ran at me and got in between me and my car, so I was not able to get in. The inside portion of the gas station was behind me, and he was blocking my car on the other side of me. I ran into the gas station for help, and he chased me inside yelling. I was scared he was going to grab me and throw me in his car, and he was still coming towards me in the store. I ended up running behind the counter and crouching down behind the man working there. The scary guy kept screaming at the person working there, telling him to make me get out from behind there, and started walking around the side of the counter to come back there. The person working there was yelling at him to leave and started reaching under the counter for something, I assume a gun, but I don't know. As soon as he reached under the counter, the scary man turned around, ran out, got in his car, and sped away. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm sure something awful would have happened if I had gone to his car or the worker hadn't let me behind the counter. The Eerie Men. This happened when I was 8. I lived in a very small village, more of a patch of houses, really. Barely any people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I don't even know if it had a real name, but we just called it the Ridge because of the tall hill near the east side. My best friend back then was a girl named Emmy. We were both 8, maybe 9. We did everything together, biked, played in the woods, and made little hideouts behind sheds. Summer lasted forever back then. One day, the old lady who lived at the edge of town, Mrs. Telly, told us she was having her 80th birthday party that weekend. She was always kind and gave us little candies when we passed by. She said she needed 2 full pails of blueberries for her birthday pie and jam and asked if we could go out and pick them. We said yes right away. No hesitation. I remember feeling proud that she trusted us. We went out after lunch with 2 rusty metal buckets and started picking in the fields near the old road. It was hot that day. Like sunburn after 5 minutes hot. We picked for what felt like hours but barely filled half of one bucket. The bushes were all picked over, or the berries were shriveled and dry. I was sweating through my shirt, and Emmy had tied hers around her waist. Her cheeks were bright red. We were about to give up and head back when we saw them. 2 men walking toward us from the side of the field. Not old, but not young either. Probably in their 20s. Both wearing button-up shirts, black pants, and sunglasses. In the middle of a heat wave. One of them leaned down and smiled, saying something like, "What are you kids up to out here?" "Picking blueberries," I said. He nodded and crouched down next to us. His friend just stood behind him, not saying anything, just looking around like he was waiting. "There's a whole patch of 'em up over that hill," he said, pointing behind him. "Really fat ones. Hardly anyone knows it's there." Emmy was looking at me weird. She didn't say anything, but I remember her hand tugging a little on my sleeve. "We can show you, if you want," the guy said. "You'll have your buckets full in no time." And for some dumb reason, I said yes. I didn't think about it. Didn't wonder who they were. I didn't ask why 2 grown men were walking through fields without any buckets or gear. I just said yes. And we followed. As we walked, Emmy stayed quiet. I kept trying to ask questions. "Is it far? Do you guys live here? What's your name?" They gave vague answers like "you'll see" or "almost there." The second guy still hadn't said anything at all. The grass got taller, and the sun felt worse the higher we climbed. We couldn't even see the village anymore. I remember my stomach started to feel weird. Not sick, just off. Like a knot was forming. Then Emmy leaned toward me and whispered in the softest voice I've ever heard. "Something's wrong with these guys. Run." I barely had time to process it before she bolted. Full speed. Down the hill. Not even looking back. I dropped the bucket and ran after her. I don't even know if they chased us. I didn't look. I just ran and ran like my life depended on it. The grass slapped my arms, my legs hurt, and my chest was burning, but I didn't stop. We finally saw the village again. The tiny road. The roof of Mrs. Telly's house. We ran straight into her yard. She was sitting on her porch, sipping sweet tea. We tried to explain but were both breathing so hard we sounded insane. She got us inside, locked the door, and gave us water. When we finally calmed down, we told her everything. She didn't say much. Just looked out the window for a long time. The men were gone. Completely vanished. We never saw them again. No one in the village had ever seen them before. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Emmy hadn't said anything. If she hadn't run. If we'd followed them another 5 minutes. I still dream about their faces. That smile. The way they kept looking around like they were waiting for something. Why 2 grown men won't go into the woods just outside of town. Back in 2023, I and my partner were both living at his mom's house. Most days we'd get home from work, about 5 p.m., get dressed, and then we would go to these woods in the hills just outside the town we live in. For context, these woods as a whole are 12 miles long and 4 miles wide. There are breaks in the woods of farmland and fields, creating separate woods over these hills with different names. You can walk through these woods if you want. There are paths winding through most of the woods as trails, and if you want to walk over the span of hills, from one side to the other, you can if you really want to, just most of it is through the woods and uphill if you're coming from the south. The one we always went to is called Windown Woods. So I and my partner would go to these woods nearly every day after we finished work just to go for a walk or a smoke or both. We went about doing our usual routine, walking around and talking about our days, following the trail in these woods that loops around a large set of trees with more around you on the outside. It would kind of look like a messed up donut from a bird's eye view, I guess. We were walking on the path that takes you back up towards the top of the woods. That path also takes you down towards the car park once you get to the meeting point of all the paths. When we see this man in the distance walking down the path. This is one of the trails that just goes up into the woods beyond Windown. We've still got to get to the meeting point of all the paths to get back to the car. At this point he's pretty far away from us still, but I had a bad feeling because the first thing I noticed about this man when we got closer was that he was wearing office shoes and carrying a pair of hiking boots while seemingly on a walk in the woods. We were talking about this as we were walking up and laughing about how strange it was. The guy was walking faster than us as he was going downhill and reached the meeting point of the paths a few minutes before we did, but we could see him the whole time. When he got to the meeting point of the paths, all he did was stand there. He didn't do anything. He just stood and was looking around. I had a really bad feeling at this point, as he didn't even look like he was lost, he just looked like he was waiting for something. My partner and I were pretty weirded out at this point and were thinking about turning around and heading back down into the woods and going back around the long way, just to get away from this guy's weird vibes. In the end we decided that walking back down into the woods would ultimately look way too suspicious, as the man had definitely seen us walking up the path towards him at the same time we'd seen him walking down, so we just kept walking up. The whole time this guy was still just standing there looking around with these shoes in his hands. Having no other choice than to walk past this guy to get to the path down to the car park, we went up and passed him. Getting close to him, I saw something that worried me more than it weirded me out. The guy had a backpack on, and there was a handle coming out of it. 100% the handle of a hammer or an axe. I knew it couldn't have been anything else. He hadn't been on a phone at all the whole time we'd seen him, not even when he was just loitering around. Just more and more stuff adding up and freaking a man out. As we walked past him and started down the path towards the car park, the guy decided he now knew where he needed to go without getting a phone out or a compass, nothing, and started walking down behind us. At this point I was freaking out, and so was my partner, who doesn't usually get paranoid about stuff like this because I do it all the time for no reason, but this guy was not right. There were no other cars in the car park besides mine, so he had no reason to be walking there. We were walking as fast as we could without running away from this guy. After what felt like a lifetime, we got to the car, locked the doors, and drove off. I didn't even look back. To this day I think about that guy and how strange he was acting, but then again I think about how strange we were probably acting, and maybe the poor guy was simply on a walk. Cut to just the other week, and my partner and I are at our friend's house for their birthday, just hanging out, meeting their other friends we haven't met before, and having a blast. But as usual with every small group hangout, it got late, and we started talking about weird experiences we'd had and spooky encounters. Obviously we told everyone about our encounter with this really strange man in the woods. A couple of the girls at this hangout work at a reserve called Fine Court. It's one of the woods in the hills I've been talking about. They seemed pretty rattled by the story we had told and said that they had one that would make it worse, but they had to tell the group now. Plus, we needed to hear. One evening at work E was on a closing shift with her manager, and they'd been cleaning up the cafe and doing final checks when E's manager tells her that he's good doing the rest by himself and that she can just go home. Who doesn't want to hear that? So off she goes to her car. Sits there for a bit to chill and roll a cigarette before driving home. Later that night she gets a text saying, "Don't ask, just don't come into work tomorrow." E finds out that after she left work, her manager had finished cleaning up like he said and gone to his car to leave. Getting into his car, a man approached him from out of the woods and started wrestling with him, trying to steal his car keys. Managing to get the man off and get into his car, the manager drove away and called the police. After talking to police, they connected some dots of a call they'd had earlier that evening from a concerned neighbor living in a village a couple miles from Fine Court, reporting a suspected burglary of one of her neighbors. Another call from a mental health institute in a town about as far away as ours from these woods from the opposite direction, saying one of their patients had escaped. Turns out after the police put the whole story together, this man escaped, got a haircut, and then walked miles to this village in the middle of nowhere. He broke into this house he thought was abandoned. It was actually the home of an elderly couple. The man was completely disabled and wheelchair bound, and his carer was his wife. The man actually ended the elderly lady and just left the man in the house before leaving and walking into the woods, wandering around them and looking for someone with a car he could steal. That's when he ended up at fine court and tried to take manager's car, running off into the woods again to find someone else. My partner and I are so sure this is the same man we saw acting suspicious at Windown all that time ago, as their story was from the same month as ours was and the timeframes matched up perfectly to when we would have seen him after he had tried to steal the manager's car and run back off into the woods again. The police caught him the next day just wandering around in the woods up there. He was following us back down to the car, but who's going to jump two guys in an open space where one of us could have easily made it to the road? I think he was trying to freak us out and get us to go back into the woods when he stopped at that meeting point and was loitering around. This still horrifies me to this day, and I just needed to get it off my chest and share this with someone. Scary encounter on a dark highway in the middle of nowhere. When I was around 18 or 19, I and a group of my female friends all drove to George, Washington, for the Warped Tour at the Gorge Amphitheater, which is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. After a very long and tiring, but fun, day, we piled into the car around 9 p.m. and headed back home. We were driving along the highway, which had no lights and was surrounded by forest on both sides. Eventually, a white car was quickly approaching our car from behind because they were speeding. We thought nothing of it, and the person who was driving our car got into the right lane to let them pass, which they did. Once around us, they stopped speeding and started doing the speed limit. None of us, at that point, thought anything was out of the ordinary. We were all pretty oblivious because we were talking to each other and having a nice time, until I randomly noticed that we didn't seem to be going as fast as we should have been. I looked to the front to check the speedometer and noticed that we were only doing about 45, which was 10 under. I eyed the car in front of us and wondered out loud why they'd been speeding, only to stop speeding and go under the speed limit once they were in front of another car. Everyone pretty much wrote it off as yeah, ha ha, how dumb. We went back to talking for a few minutes, but then the person in front of us slowed down to 40 and then 35, at which point the person driving our car was getting irritated and said, "What the hell is this guy doing?" So we were all, by that point, completely focused on the car, which then proceeded to slow down to 20, 15, and 10, and then they just stopped. Right there in the road. We were all pretty freaked out by this point, but still trying to be calm and rational. We started to wonder if something might be wrong, but we were doubtful, because we assumed that they most likely would have tried to pull over to the side of the road if that had been the case. From behind us, another car started approaching in the distance, and the car in front of us started to drive, very quickly, up to the speed limit, which is when we started getting really scared because it was too suspicious. The driver of our car tried, as the other car passed the front car, to stay behind the one that had just approached, but the car in front of us would not let us by and was staying exactly with ours. If we sped up or slowed down, so did they. Because of it, fearing an accident, our driver got too scared to try to switch lanes, and we backed off as the other car disappeared ahead of us. When we were alone with the original car, they once again stopped in the road. At this point, some of the people I was with started crying because we had no idea if the occupants of the original car were pranking us or if they genuinely intended to harm us. One of my friends suggested that our driver speed around them, but I said not to because I was afraid they were going to try to ram us off the road if we attempted it. The way I saw it, being behind them was the only advantage we had. None of us had cell phone reception, which made us all far too aware that it was truly like a scene straight out of a horror movie. We finally decided to do a U-turn with the person still just sitting there, so we sped off in the opposite direction as fast as we could. The first chance we got, we pulled over on the side of the road with our lights off in one of those gravelly areas that a lot of semi-drivers rest in so we could wait for another car to come by. Finally, after something like 20 minutes, we saw a semi coming down the highway. We pulled in front of it and blocked the semi from letting another car through. Sure enough, as we reached the spot we'd been, the car was still in the same area, going under the speed limit. When they saw us, and the semi, they started speeding again and disappeared ahead of us. I will always think back on it, wondering if we escaped something horrible or if it was just a group of people playing an extremely mean and terrifying prank. My creepy neighbor. I'm a 26-year-old female. I've been living in my current apartment for 7 years, but my next-door neighbor has been residing in this building since the 1980s, making him at least 53 years old, which is about twice my age. Also, I need to mention that my neighbor has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I know this because I live in an area where a lot of people also know this guy. He used to be an artist and a teacher at a university, but ever since he got diagnosed, he has been struggling with finding a new job and maintaining his social and private life. I don't have any stigmas around mental disorders. In fact, I often feel quite empathetic towards people who suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses, but he's overall quite an aggressive and short-tempered person. He is also very huge, I would say at least 2 meters tall and weighing probably over 100 kilograms. So, therefore, there's a reason all of the other neighbors, including me, people who used to know him and befriend him, are now afraid of him and try not to agitate him, although sometimes it's a challenge. Since I've been living in my apartment, there have been multiple, I don't even remember all, occasions where my next door neighbor has tried to strike up some kind of conversation with me, mostly when he's in his manic state and soon to be hospitalized. Sometimes I don't see him for weeks, even months. But sometimes he is ringing my house multiple times a day, always asking for some kind of favor or just wanting to talk to me about random topics. The first time this happened was 6.5 years ago, about half a year after I started living in my apartment. The first time I talked to him was after my university friend and I were walking to my apartment following a night out. We were both quite tipsy, and as we approached the doors of my apartment building, we both had a little bit of a struggle unlocking the code to get inside, because the lock system is quite old and glitchy. Suddenly we both heard a man's voice saying something to us from behind. He said, "Hello girls, what are you doing?" Trying to sound friendly, although we both got startled by him approaching and getting super close to us. We both looked at each other and then at him, and I replied, "Hello. We are trying to get inside the building, but the code and lock are glitching." He looked at me for about 10 seconds, looking me up and down while smirking. Mind you, I was 19 at the time, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable. Then he asked, "Do you live here? Is your apartment number?" I got really uncomfortable after him asking me this question, but I really didn't know how to react, so I said, "Yes." Then he smiled and asked, "Isn't your name underscore?" Which is my name. I looked at my friend and saw that she too felt really creeped out by these questions. We both stayed silent for a while, and then he said, "Okay, girls, I'll help you open the door." He helped us, we got inside the hallway, but it felt so unsettling because he literally saw us go into my apartment while unlocking his doors and going inside. Some time went by, I would say maybe 2 months, and nothing happened. Then one weekday morning I woke up at around 6 a.m. in my apartment because my doorbell was ringing. I also lived there alone at the time. Since I don't have a peephole on my doors, I felt quite paranoid and scared to let anyone know I was home. Unless I was expecting someone to come over, I always pretended I wasn't home. I don't do this anymore though. The ringing stopped after a while. Since I felt quite scared and confused about why someone would ring my doorbell this early in the morning, I decided to wake up and get ready for the day. I only had to leave my house at 11 a.m., so I had a few morning hours for myself and to study. At around 9 a.m. my doorbell rang again. I pretended I wasn't home, but I now suspected that the person ringing my doorbell was someone from my apartment building, because it seemed unlikely that a stranger would wait 3 hours to ring my doorbell again. I felt super creeped out and tried to be as quiet as possible. At 11 a.m. I had to leave my house, so I tried to exit my apartment as quietly as possible. As I started to lock my apartment doors, I heard my neighbor's doors unlock and him stepping out in the hallway and saying, "Hello there, I've been trying to reach you the whole morning. Why didn't you answer? I knew you were at home." I started to panic but didn't want him to notice it. I replied, "Hello. I was sleeping, I probably didn't hear the doorbell ringing." He didn't seem to believe my answer but continued, "I've been trying to reach you all morning because we have a lot of things to discuss. We don't have much time, but because of me handling everything, all is under control for now. You need to look at what I've left under your entrance rug." He was mumbling a lot of nonsensical words, and I realized that he wasn't mentally stable. He might have been experiencing a manic episode or something similar, as he was discussing obscure matters that he needed to address, but I really didn't understand any of it. He asked me once more to look under my entrance door rug, so I looked. Underneath it was a trowel/spatula that was broken in half. I was so confused, but he continued insisting that I needed to help him hide the trowel/spatula because he had done something with it that he couldn't explain to me. At this point I was so scared I just ran out of the apartment building without replying to him or looking back. I heard him running after me for a while, but then he stopped. In the evening I was super scared to come home, but I didn't really have a choice, so home I went. Not even a few hours went by when my doorbell was ringing again. This time I answered, "Who's there?" without opening my door. My neighbor answered, "Hi. I just wanted to apologize about what I said earlier today. I simply have so many things to tell you." He continued rambling incoherently. He said that he is currently playing a real-life simulation game called Quest, that I play a part in this game, and that there is something hidden in the garden house outside our apartment. He won't tell me what it is, and I need to come outside with him and check it out myself. I obviously refused and instantly called my dad, because he lives just a few blocks away from me, and I asked him to please come over and help me talk some sense into my neighbor and ask him to leave me alone. The worst thing is that my dad came over and spoke with my neighbor and thought that this guy was completely sane and said I was overreacting. Maybe the guy tried to be kind and polite to my dad, I don't know, but it left me feeling unsettled. The next day I was informed that my neighbor demolished our hallway and some of the mailboxes attached to the wall by the entrance. He also smashed a window and a light bulb in the hallway. From what I gathered, he was being aggressive towards his girlfriend and a few other neighbors from our building. The police and an ambulance were called, and he allegedly got hospitalized. I also learned that after this incident he broke up with his long-term girlfriend. That just really made him spiral downwards. For a few years, I rarely saw the neighbor. When I did see him, we would just exchange greetings, but he started bothering me again 2 years ago. I'm mostly unafraid of him now, maybe because my boyfriend moved in with me, maybe because I grew up a little and felt more capable and secure, maybe because he barely talked to me for 3 to 4 years, but still, if there are situations where I talk to him, I try to avoid agitating him. Besides, I feel like I'm the only person he treats kindly. Don't know why, though. It all started happening again in November 2023, when he started ringing our doorbell many times a day. When I first answered him, I dared to open the door, because my boyfriend was beside me. He said, "Hello. I came up to you because I wanted to let you know I'm working on a new project, and therefore, I might listen to some music. I like to turn the music up quite a bit, but I hope you don't mind." I could see the guy was swerving and barely kept his eyes open. He also stank of alcohol and was holding a burnt-out blunt in his fingers, although there's no smoking policy in our apartments or hallways. I replied, "Well, I understand. I also like to listen to music loudly, but please don't blast music late at night when everyone's asleep." He smirked and then said, "I know. I've heard you listening to music many times." I got a bit confused about how he knows that, because I don't listen to music that loudly, but okay. So from that time on, he started blasting music 24/7, and there was no way of making him turn it down. If anything, I felt like he fed off the agitation of other neighbors and us pleading with him to turn the volume down. I regretted ever saying it was okay, because there were several instances when my boyfriend and I woke up around 3 a.m. due to the music being so loud that our walls were shaking. We tried calling police, which was useless, turning off electricity, banging on his doors, and asking him to stop. We realized that the best option was to ignore the situation and use earplugs or similar solutions because he seemed intent on provoking a confrontation with my boyfriend. Whenever my boyfriend approached him to request lowering the volume, he would respond with excessive hostility and raise his voice, stating, "You're not my neighbor, is my neighbor, and if she is bothered, she should come directly to me and express her concerns." Which I did, but nothing ever changed. This went on until at least the end of January 2024. At the same time, there were several times when I was smoking in the garden of our apartment building. Many times he would notice me through his window and then come outside to talk to me, asking me personal questions, complimenting me on my looks, and talking about his projects. He also hoarded lots of random stuff in our garden because he wanted to make a small workstation for himself and a bomb shelter in our basement, but he never did anything with those materials. He once asked me if I would like it if he made me a bench so I could sit while smoking. I said no. One evening I was outside smoking, and I noticed him taking out several garbage bags outside the basement. It looked like he was cleaning the basement out. It just gave me weird vibes. Then he came up to me and asked for lighters. I gave them to him, didn't take them back, and went inside. For a while I noticed through the window that we were throwing away random bags in the trash. The next day, I didn't have university or work, so I stayed home alone. In the afternoon my doorbell rang. I answered the door. It was my neighbor. He said, "Hi. Can you please come to my apartment because there's a friend of mine inside, and something is wrong with his leg?" I looked at him in disbelief and said, "What friend? What's his name?" I asked this to see his reaction and to try to understand whether he was lying or genuinely needed help. He hesitated, then said the name of his friend. I replied, "How long has he been in your apartment, and what exactly happened to his leg? What kind of injury does your friend have?" He seemed not to know the answer right away, but then he replied, "I don't know, he's been at my house for several days, and I can't explain what kind of injury it is." I said, "There's no way I'm entering his apartment," to which he replied, "I'm afraid you don't have a choice, you have to come and help me out." I just shut the door as quickly as possible and locked it. There was no way I was going inside his apartment. God knows what his plans were for me, and I'm not risking it. A few days later, He rang my doorbell again and asked me to come outside to the street because there was a dead homeless person, who most likely died from the cold, and he needed my help. I went outside, and the ambulance was already there, the dead person was already covered up, and there was nothing I could have done. Then he began to speak incoherently about how everything was related to a robbery, claiming that someone had robbed him, which led to the body being on the street. I didn't really understand what he meant by that. Was it his friend? Or some other person? Was it the guy who robbed him? Does my neighbor have any involvement in this incident, or is he simply acting irrationally? I really didn't want to know, and it seemed that nobody was suspicious of him. I genuinely didn't and still don't know what to believe, because I feel like this guy would truly be capable of ending someone in my opinion.